Check in at the end of the world, devour the Fire Lord at the beginning. In a certain city in China, the once thriving streets lay in ruins. Scrapped and damaged vehicles were abandoned along the roadside, and old bloodstains still marked the asphalt. A gust of wind lifted tattered plastic bags into the air, momentarily hinting at the human presence that had long since vanished from this desolate place. Roar! Several zombies in ragged clothes, their faces twisted into grotesque expressions, wandered aimlessly along the street. Their vacant, bloodshot eyes scanned the air, their hands outstretched, groping for prey. Though they had lost their need for sight, their heightened sense of smell and sharp hearing compensated for the absence. Suddenly, one of the zombies sniffed something unusual and jerked its head upward. Puff! In the blink of an eye, its head exploded, sending blood spraying like rain across the pavement. The sharp scent of fresh blood immediately drew the attention of nearby zombies, who began to shuffle toward the fallen creature. A wave of undead surged forward, the air now thick with the sound of blood-chilling roars approaching from the distance. Roar! Poof! Another violent burst of blood painted the dim streets a deeper red. Out of the shadows emerged a towering zombie monster, standing several meters tall, its entire body drenched in gore. The crimson beast leapt onto a scrapped car with terrifying speed, crushing the hood beneath its weight. As it bounded away, the shattered windshield and tiny bullet holes on the car's frame glinted faintly in the dim light. Bang! The broken glass scattered on the ground as the car erupted in flames. Thick smoke and clouds of dust mixed with the metallic stench of blood, forming a dense, choking fog that rolled down the street like a sandstorm. On the other side of the fog, a squad of soldiers clad in tactical gear sprinted through the debris, only to halt abruptly at the edge of the swirling mist. The captain at the front lifted a communicator to his mouth, speaking urgently. Mist detected in Area B1. We've lost sight of the Fire Lord. A cold, female voice responded over the radio. Understood. Maintain your position. Reinforcements with ability users are en route. Do not let the Balrog Lord escape. Yes, ma'am. The captain lowered the communicator and motioned to his team. They immediately adjusted their formation and advanced cautiously into the fog. Meanwhile, within the crimson mist, blood-colored zombies darted through the streets, releasing bone-chilling shrieks. The haunting roars echoed through the city, making even the surrounding undead tremble in fear. Ominously, a towering red figure sped through the ruins, its movements relentless. It collided with a tall building, shattering windows and plowing straight through it without pause. The structure groaned under the impact and crumbled, sending white smoke billowing into the air. The red figure tumbled into a deep alley below, sparks flying as it skidded against the walls. It landed with a twitching thud, its crimson body convulsing on the dirty ground. Its bloodshot eyes burned with rage, yet something peculiar was happening. Ordinary zombies now staggered toward it, mouths gaping and exhaling eerie blue mist. Unlike other zombies, these didn't avoid the red beast. They snarled as they advanced, undeterred. But before they could strike, the red monster's thick arm shot forward, gripping a zombie's face with terrifying force. Boom! The red creature's arm exploded into a cloud of blood mist, transforming into writhing blood-colored vines. The grotesque vines coiled around the zombie, draining its body of blood. In moments, the creature was reduced to a shriveled husk, lifeless and discarded like trash. The red zombie's eyes grew even more bloodthirsty, glowing brighter with each drop absorbed. But just as it cast the corpse aside, a feral expression twisted its face. It clutched its head in agony, and with a guttural roar, it collapsed unconscious in the alley. Strangely, the crimson hue of its skin began to fade. The monstrous body gradually withered, transforming before the fog had fully cleared. Pale skin replaced the blood-red surface, and in mere moments, the terrifying creature had become a young man, handsome, but unconscious. Not far from the alley, a team of soldiers dressed in dark blue uniforms continued to search the streets in methodical silence. The distant howls of monsters echoed eerily through the night. Deep within the alley, the young man stirred. His body was battered, his ragged clothes barely clinging to him, and his torso lay exposed to the chill night air. Yet his chest faintly rose and fell, a sign of life. As if disturbed by the cacophony around him, the young man's eyelashes fluttered, and slowly, his eyes opened. Groaning, he reached for his pounding head, feeling as though his body had been torn apart. Ugh! If I knew the graduation party would end like this, I wouldn't have drunk so much, he muttered groggily. Why does everything hurt? Confused, Mu Chiu rubbed his eyes, realizing something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the comfort of his bed at home, he was lying in a cold, dark alley. Instinctively, he tried to crawl backward, but his hand brushed against something strange. Turning his head, he froze in horror. Next to him was not a rock or debris, it was a shriveled, mummified corpse, its face twisted into a grotesque expression of fear. Shit! Mu Chiu yelped in panic, but before he could scream, memories surged into his mind like a flood. He saw scenes of carnage, a blood-soaked figure, draped in a crimson shroud, standing atop a mountain of corpses. Each body was drained and withered, their faces locked in expressions of sheer terror. And in the center of it all stood the red-clad monster, exuding an aura of doom. Zombies surrounded the figure, howling as they lunged without fear of death. Yet more terrifying than the undead was the massive, one-horned monster with molten skin, charging toward the blood-drenched beast, its jaws gaping wide. Scenes of memories played back in Mu Chiu's brain like a film. In these moments, Mu Chiu felt dizzy and her brain was about to burst. After reading these memories, a thin layer of cold sweat broke out on Mu Chiu's forehead. He could clearly see that the blood-red figure in the memory was his own face. And this world is no longer like the real world we live in. The zombie virus broke out here 2 years ago. Cities were occupied by the majestic zombie army. Countless people were displaced and their families were destroyed. The self in his memory also did not survive the disaster. To his surprise, he turned into a mutated zombie. Evolved a powerful ability, Devour. My own fire power was obtained after devouring the one-horned monster in my memory. And I also became stronger step by step after devouring this powerful power, and finally became the zombie emperor in this city. And he discovered that the zombie he just swallowed was actually a mutated zombie, and the ability it evolved turned out to be an ice power. Have I traveled to a parallel world, or? Mu Chiu's face instantly became frightened, her brows furrowed and she stopped talking. Another guess that Mu Chiu did not dare to say again was that the 10 years in real life were all a dream. The real self turned into a zombie that lusted after human flesh as early as 2 years ago. But he can no longer think about it so much, because he remembers that as early as 2 months ago, he was captured by the neighboring survivor base in his own territory. And during these 2 months, he suffered inhuman abuse and research. However, he relied on his powerful self-healing ability to break free after recovering 3 days ago, causing a scene in the base and then escaping back to his territory. It was on the way to escape that he regained consciousness after falling into coma. There are still soldiers chasing him. No matter what, my current situation is very dangerous. Mu Chiu forced herself to calm down. Waves of cold wind howled, but Mu Chiu, whose body had evolved into a zombie king, felt a slight chill in her heart. There was no time to sort out her thoughts, and she couldn't care about the shriveled corpse beside her. Mu Chiu hurriedly changed into the blood-stained clothes on the corpse. With a thought in his mind, a ball of flame appeared in his palm, and the shabby clothes and shriveled corpse that he had replaced were burned to ashes by the flames he released. Just as he stood up unsteadily, there was a sound of footsteps behind him. Mu Chiu smiled bitterly but did not run away. If the probability of someone with abilities appearing among humans is 1 in 1,000, then the probability of mutant zombies among zombies is 1 in 10,000. Different from ordinary mutant zombies whose bodies have mutated, real mutant zombies have a variety of abilities, each of which is weird and powerful and difficult to guard against. Already surrounded by heavy siege, it is obviously impossible to escape from the current situation. The thoughtful Mu Qiu immediately made a decision, to blend into human society. A zombie is trying to blend into the human world. This decision sounds a bit appalling, but even though Mu Qiu has received all the memories and combat experience of the Zombie King, it does not mean that he can accept the fact that he has turned into a flesh-eating zombie in an instant. Subconsciously, he still preferred to stay in human society. He swore that he was definitely not trying to survive among humans because he was greedy for life and afraid of death. But, can I really muddle through? Click. Who? Feeling the voice behind her, Mu Qiu subconsciously raised her hands and turned around to face the soldiers in front of her, with a look of surprise and fear on her face. Pfft. I saw a girl's melodious laughter coming from the ranks of soldiers in front. Mu Qiu took a closer look and saw a pretty girl in blue among the crowd. Unlike the other soldiers, this girl was not wearing the combat uniform of a special forces soldier, nor did she look like a girl. Take any protective measures. There are still a few people in this team dressed like this. This girl should be an ability user. Mu Qiu secretly thought. As the name suggests, ability users are humans who have endured the virus and mutated and evolved. They are now the fighters who stand at the forefront of mankind. Uncle, this guy is so funny. The girl covered her mouth and smiled at the leader. Indeed, now Mu Qiu has changed into the clothes of the mummy, but the originally white clothes are already stained with blood, and his handsome face is also stained with dirt and blood, coupled with his fearful expression in the movement of raising his hands, looking extremely embarrassed and weird. The awkward situation was instantly broken by the girl's words. The captain looked helplessly at the girl in blue and said helplessly, "You girl." Her family knows her own affairs, and this girl has had an eccentric personality since she was a child. Now that the end of the world has come, this child has awakened her powers, and no one can control her. There was a red monster passing by here just now, and it burned a zombie to ashes. Mu Qiu said tremblingly, but her eyes kept staring at the guns emitting blue light in the hands of the soldiers. In my memory, these firearms have long been improved versions, and they are extremely lethal to zombies. In order to deal with yourself, did you even take out such a small number of weapons? I figured out a lot of things in an instant, my body was trembling, and then layers of frost appeared on the ground. My home is nearby. I went out to look for food because I was too hungry. I didn't do anything. Seeing the layers of frost condensing on the ground, the girl in blue who spoke just now exclaimed. This kind of ability, could it be that this is a rare elemental ability user? What? There can be people with abilities in dangerous areas like the red zone. Or are they elemental ones? This is a real treasure. Everyone looked at each other, talking, and looked at Mu Qiu with surprise. The captain did not speak, but looked at the alley in front of him, and then raised the communicator in his hand. Report the S-Class Heretic, Lord Fire Demon. We have fled to Area A3. In addition, we found a survivor in an alley, suspected to have elemental powers. I only heard a cold female voice coming from the communicator. Take the survivors back to the base and order Group C in Area A3 to prepare to meet the enemy. The other teams will continue to hunt and gather for an ambush to capture the target at any time. The captain who received the instruction immediately waved his hand, and then said to the girl in blue, Linger, take the survivors back to the base for an awakening test. The people in Group A will follow me and continue the search. Yes. Why do you need me to do this kind of thing again? Hearing the girl's complaint, it was obvious that this was not the first time that she had picked up a survivor. Mu Qiu blinked her innocent eyes and said nothing. Watching the team leave, only Mu Qiu and the girl in blue were left in the small alley. The girl in blue looked at Mu Qiu reaching out her hand, showed a sweet smile and said, introduce yourself, I am Wei Ling Air, a member of the Yuhai Base Special Forces. Mu Qiu hesitated for a moment, but still held the blood-stained hand, deliberately making herself a little nervous and said, Mu Qiu, my name is Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu, right? I'll take you back to the base now. We're on the edge of the red zone and we shouldn't encounter powerful monsters. Don't worry, I can punch those ordinary zombies in the green zone one by one. As she said that, the girl raised her arms. Her slender white arms seemed to have no strength at all. The sun gradually dropped below the horizon, but the shadows of the two people in the dusk were reflected very long. You mean, this man named Mu Qiu was picked up by you in an alley in the red zone? In a high-rise office in the safety zone called Yuhai Base, a woman in military uniform with a frosty complexion was sitting on a chair and reading a document report. There was a man standing in front of the table. If Mu Qiu were here, he would definitely recognize that this man was the Special Forces captain in the alley. The woman in military uniform has a strong nose and beautiful face, and her pair of willow leaf eyebrows make her even more heroic. The captain replied, Yes, sir. According to this person, his family ran a supermarket before the apocalypse, and after the apocalypse, he lived on the food stored in the supermarket. In recent days, the food has been used up, so he decided to take risks and go out in search of food. After hearing this, the woman in military uniform first lowered her head and thought for a moment, then smiled, put the document on the table and said, Wei Ying, how credible do you think his statement is? The captain named Wei Ying said, We have checked the supermarket he described. The entire building has been smashed to pieces by the Balrog. There is no evidence to confirm his identity. Wei Ying said, suddenly remembering the frost that formed on Mu Qiu's feet out of fear in the alley, and said in surprise, But according to what we know, this Mu Qiu may be an ability user, or even a rare elemental system. Oh. Is that so? Hearing this, the woman in military uniform frowned, knocked on the table, pondered for a moment and said, No matter what, elemental ability users are exactly the talents we are scarce now. Take him to do the awakened person test. If he passes, he will be trained in the training department, and someone will continue to keep an eye on him. If there are any special circumstances, he will inform me immediately. Wei Ying gave a standard military salute, yes. When Mu Qiu woke up, it was already dawn. He opened the quilt and got up from the bed. The bright sunshine shone warmly from outside through the window, making him mistakenly think that he was still in the prosperous but busy world before the end of the world. At this moment, Mu Qiu had already changed into a relatively clean white shirt. Unknowingly, he had been living in this Yuhai base for 3 days. He took a deep breath. Except for the occasional smell of blood, the air seemed to be no different from the real world. On the contrary, the large-scale shutdown of factory machines caused the nature to mother feels much more comfortable. Very funny thing. The place where he is now is a safe zone called Jade Sea Base. It is composed of survivor alliances from several nearby municipalities. It has tens of thousands of people. It can be regarded as one of the few shelters since the end of the world. He turned around and looked at the people on the bed around him. Except for a few people who were fast asleep, all the people who were awake had haggard faces and empty eyes as if they had lost their yearning for life. Like myself, these are all survivors who have been rescued from the disaster area, and most of them possess superpowers or have a tendency to evolve. Only then could they be arranged in this room that could protect them from wind and rain. The treatment in such a temporary residence is already very good. At least they can guarantee hot and cold meals. As for the fate of other ordinary people, it's hard to say. Those who were lucky enough to have a skill could still make a living in this age of cannibalism. Those who were unlucky enough to live on the street and eat meat were commonplace. After taking a deep breath and sorting herself out, Mu Qiu walked out of the room and came outside. The moment she opened the door, the glaring sunlight shone in, which stung Mu Qiu and subconsciously raised her arms to block it. Sitting casually on a step by the side of the road, Mu Chiu couldn't help but fall into deep thought as she looked at the flow of people in front of her who were not densely packed with shabby clothes and dusty faces. First of all, it was obvious that he had sneaked into this survivor base. The medical staff responsible for the inspection did not notice any abnormalities in his body when he entered earlier. Coupled with the fact that he deliberately exposed his supernatural powers, it should have attracted the attention of his superiors, right? In my impression, there are very few awakened ones of other elemental types. When I was still the monster codenamed Fire Demon Lord, I was very interested in this kind of zombies. Very interested in eating them. According to normal procedures, I should be placed into a combat team similar to the one before. Then I can develop steadily and plan for a retreat. Hey, it looks like you're recovering well. Not far away, a pretty and well-dressed girl walked over. She looked like an urban beauty before the apocalypse, and was incompatible with the slightly dilapidated scene around her. Wei Linger. Mu Chiu raised her hand and greeted the girl. This person is none other than Wei Linger, who took Mu Chiu all the way back to the Yuhai base. In the 3 days since he came to the base, apart from some staff responsible for reception and review, the girl in front of him had the most exchanges with him. At this moment, Wei Linger was holding a bag of bread in her hand. She walked closer and handed the bread to Mu Chiu naturally. Mu Chiu was stunned for a moment, then reacted and took the bread and said directly, "Why are you so nice to me?" It's no wonder that Mu Chiu was surprised. Although food like bread is not very precious to an awakened person like Wei Linger, Mu Chiu had just met her, and Wei Linger couldn't make the mistake of staying away from home for him. Come here. The other survivors in the house are still struggling to survive on 3 meals a day. Unexpectedly, after hearing Mu Chiu's words, Wei Linger just slapped Mu Chiu on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't be so sentimental. I came to help you partly because your experience is somewhat similar to mine. I can't help but sympathize, but on the other hand." Mu Chiu's eyes couldn't help but be attracted by the girl's words. An awakened person who may be of the elemental system has great potential for development. In other words, you are worthy of me personally coming to win over you. After saying that, Wei Linger patted Mu Chiu's shoulder, as if she was very optimistic about you. So, young man, you have to work hard. Mu Chiu had already calculated something in her mind, but she was a little surprised by the girl's straightforward answer. She shook her head with a wry smile. Sure enough, there really is no such thing as a free lunch. Wei Linger actually nodded in agreement. Not bad, good, rare things can be lived in, rare things can be lived in. Stretching out, the girl's slim curves were revealed. Wei Linger yawned slightly, rubbed her eyes and said, "It seems that you have almost recovered and it's time to adapt to the environment here. Someone will come over in the afternoon to take you for a test." After saying that, he patted Mu Chiu's shoulder again and said with a serious smile, "If you are really a rare elemental awakener, the higher-ups will definitely train you. The awakened ones, test." As Mu Chiu said this, she unconsciously opened the bag of bread, grabbed the bread and took a bite. The bean paste filling tastes pretty good. During the conversation with Wei Linger, Mu Chiu learned the specific information about the so-called awakened ones. Awakened ones refer to special humans whose bodies have been corroded by the virus, and instead of mutating into zombie monsters, they have awakened some kind of strange power. Among them, those who can prevent their brains from being invaded by viruses and lose their rationality are the noble, awakened ones, after the end of the world. On the contrary, those who lose their rationality and only have eating and destructive instincts in their bodies are called heretics. There are all kinds of superpowers, and they are all kinds of strange, but generally speaking, they are divided into 3 categories: superpower system, mutation system and element system. As the name suggests, the elemental system means that the body can control the awakened elements at will. Just like Mu Chiu's previous incarnation as the Fire Demon Lord, he can independently control fire. The flames emitted can burn down an entire building in an instant. The Fire Lord was even rated as a dangerous S-class heretic by Yuhai base. Another example is the ice zombie heretic that he later devoured. Although his level was not high, he was still a rare and powerful person among the zombies. According to the level classification, he was at least B level. The abilities of the elemental system are extremely rare among the entire group of awakened ones. It is not an exaggeration to say that they are only 1 in a million, because their destructive power is astonishing and far beyond the comparison of the other two systems. Once the ability is raised to its peak, the ability of the awakened one is enough to overwhelm mountains and seas, and destroy heaven and earth. The awakened ones of the mutant type tend to have physical mutations. Some of them are as rough as bears and become extremely powerful. They can blast through a building with one punch. Some of them grow the claws of a running wolf. Even the speed can be comparable to that of a running wolf on the grassland, but this type of awakened person usually has a strange appearance and a different physique than ordinary people. The last kind of super energy system awakened people are the most special. They often do not have the super destructive power of the element system, nor do they have the powerful physique of the mutation type awakened people, but the biggest feature of this kind of awakened people is their ability. Strange abilities such as teleportation, invisibility, telekinesis, etc. are all classified as superpowers. Elemental elements are rare among the 3 categories of awakened ones. Now you know why the organization attaches so much importance to you. Wei Linger raised her eyebrows. Mu Qiu spread his hands and stared at his palm. Strictly speaking, he should belong to the awakened person of the superpower system, but his swallowing ability was too overbearing. Even among the mysterious awakened people of the superpower system, he was the best. As if she noticed something strange about Mu Qiu, Wei Linger turned around and asked, "Hey, what's wrong with you? You look absent-minded." Being stared at by Wei Linger's crystal blue eyes, Mu Qiu felt a little guilty and asked hurriedly, "What about you? What kind of awakened person are you?" Before, Wei Linger escorted Mu Qiu back to the Yuhai safe zone. Fortunately, she didn't encounter any large monsters along the way. Even if there were some zombies blocking the road, they would all be knocked away by Wei Linger's car. Mu Qiu had no chance to experience Wei Linger's superpowers. Wei Linger stood up, put an index finger against her red lips, blinked her watery eyes and said, "Keep it a secret. You'll know if you do the awakening test this afternoon." Wei Linger gave Mu Qiu a pass, and then left with brisk steps. Seeing this, Mu Qiu shook her head, threw the bread packaging aside, and turned back to the small house where she lived. As soon as I entered the door, there happened to be soldiers inside distributing food. These foods are usually distributed to the survivors and refugees who have just entered the base like Xiang Muqiu. Of course, there are also some moldy and rotten biscuits, bread, etc., mostly. Sometimes I can't even do the most basic things. He sighed softly. Although he had the red bean bread sent by Wei Linger to cushion his belly, it was obviously not enough to stuff his teeth. So he went to get the food. As expected, Mu Qiu received a bag that was already seriously moldy. Mu Qiu tried to bite the biscuit, and the feeling in the mouth was comparable to chewing raw steel bars. After the soldiers who handed out food left, Mu Qiu sighed and put a bag of small steel bars next to her pillow, intending to use it as emergency food when she was extremely hungry. "Hey, new guy." At this time, a fat man walked over from the side. The fat was almost piled up into a meatball. Mu Qiu really wondered how this fat man could eat in this apocalyptic world where he had so many meals. "It looks like this. I saw with my own eyes that you came back after eating bread outside. After eating, you dared to share the limited food with everyone." The fat man was seen looking fiercely at Mu Qiu, but his eyes never left the little steel bar Mu Qiu placed on the bed. Mu Qiu smiled and said, "There is no rule in the base that you can't receive food after you have eaten something. Besides, whether I receive food or not, it doesn't seem to be up to you, right? The other survivors in the room didn't speak, but they all stared at Mu Chio's bag of small steel bars with salivating eyes, as if they were seeing some rare treasure right in front of them. The fat man swallowed his saliva, looked at Mu Chio and said, "Now is such a critical moment, every bite of food means one less bite. Don't be so selfish, give me the food, and I will share it with everyone." After saying that, a pair of big hands grabbed the small steel bar that Mu Chio placed on the bed. A cold light flashed across Mu Chio's eyes, and there seemed to be a hint of red deep in her pupils. Crack! The fat man's rough arm was still in midair when it was suddenly grabbed by a fair and slender hand. The fat man took a closer look and saw that it was Mu Chio who grabbed his arm and stopped him. It was obvious that the fat man wanted to say something else. Mu Chio lowered his head and couldn't see clearly the expression on his face, which made him a little unhappy. "You, get out of here. Now is the time for delicious food." The fat man didn't intend to be polite anymore, so he picked up a thick slap and was about to hit Mu Chio. But in an instant, the fat man suddenly felt that the air around him was getting colder, and then there was a tingling sensation in his right arm. In the blink of an eye, his right arm actually lost consciousness. The fat man hurriedly lowered his head and discovered a scene that stunned him. Mu Chio's eyes were lowered, and there was no expression on his cold face. Roads of frost actually condensed on his white palms, and then the coldness quickly spread to the fat man's arms until his entire arm was frozen. The fat man then he stumbled to the ground with a horrified expression, holding tightly his right arm that had been completely frozen, and wailed. "Awakened one, he is the awakened one." Some survivors in the room saw the method used by Mu Chio and immediately shouted in horror. Mu Chio lowered her head slightly and raised her head, scanning the surrounding survivors with an indifferent expression. She saw that these people's eyes were full of fear, anxiety, envy, respect and other emotions. The only thing that disappeared was the greed in his eyes when he saw the food. This is the benefit of power. The word possession has always been a privilege only for the strong. After learning the identity of Mu Chio's awakener, the eyes of the survivors in the entire room became strange. Envy, jealousy, adoration, fear and other emotions filled this small room of less than 50 square meters. The fat man was quickly taken away by the patrolling soldiers, with ice still frozen on his arms. Amidst the fat man's wails and the awe in Mu Chio's eyes, the room fell into an eerie silence. Until later, no one in this group saw the fat man again. Mu Chio shook her head. The fat man was driven to the bone by the cold air he had driven. If there were no special means or the ability of the awakened person to help him drive away the cold, the fat man would be completely disabled. He could have his arms broken, or his whole body could be paralyzed. He would be paralyzed for the rest of his life. Gotta spend it in bed. In the past few days, he had been digesting the messy memories of his original body, the Fire Demon Lord. Most of the Fire Demon Lord's memories were spent in endless killings, which made Mu Chio unavoidably tainted with some viciousness. Just for a moment, Mu Chio even wanted to use the flames to burn the fat man to death. In the end, reason prevailed, which allowed Mu Chio to stop in time and openly kill people in such a survivor base. Even if Mu Chio is a noble, awakened one, he cannot escape the blame. Mu Chio glanced at the many survivors in the room, but no one dared to look at her. Mu Chio nodded happily, lying on the bed and began to chew on the small steel bars, with relish. The strong can do whatever they want without regard to the feelings of others. This is the most naked reality in the apocalypse. Ding, congratulations to the host for meeting the check-in conditions and binding the Great World check-in system. The cold voice echoed in Mu Chio's ears. Mu Chio was so frightened that she sat up. She looked around for a while but found that there was no one around. Binding the system for the first time, I will give you a reward, the magic energy of the Holy Lord. Please pay attention to the host to receive it. Immediately, Mu Chiu felt a red halo emerge from her mind and merge into her body, and her body was filled with an inexplicable sense of power for an instant. Mu Chiu was so satisfied that she almost transformed into the Fire Demon Lord, but she held it back under the control of reason. The next check-in location is the Daishiandi Entertainment Club, and the reward will be unlocked, Nijia's mask, which can summon the ghost army. Mu Chiu stood up with a pop, frightening the surrounding survivors to tremble. System. Goldfinger. As a senior novel fan in his previous life, he was of course very familiar with systems and so on. He originally thought that he was gifted with the ability to devour, but he never expected that the system would help him. He tried to communicate with the so-called Great World Sign-In system, but did not get any response. The Holy Lord's demonic energy. Mu Chiu, who failed to get a response from the system, was not annoyed, but instead murmured to herself. Mu Chiu was stunned at first, but then she almost jumped with excitement. Who is the Holy Lord? It can be said that it is the boss that runs through the entire drama of The Adventures of Jackie Chan. Whether it is the 12 zodiac signs or the 8 demons, they are all related to it. Think about the 12 weird and unpredictable abilities: the snake's invisibility, chickens float, monkeys transform, horses can cure all diseases, dogs can live forever. Just thinking about the usefulness of these abilities makes people salivate. If he has obtained the demonic energy of the Holy Lord, doesn't this mean that he has obtained these 12 talismans? Suppressing the excitement in her heart, Mu Chiu left the room where the survivors lived and went to an open space in the woods on the hillside behind. Because in these last days, the more remote the place is, the higher the risk factor, so not many people dare to come to such a place. There was no one around, but Mu Chiu closed her eyes slightly, and she could even hear the sound of the breeze blowing in her ears. The next moment, Mu Chiu opened her eyes suddenly and saw 2 scorching lasers shooting out of her eyes. Between the lightning and flint, the fiery red laser had penetrated the big tree in front of Mu Chiu. It's really fun. Mu Chiu clearly remembered that the original, Fire Demon Lord, did not have the skill of laser eyes. Then he tried the chicken's floating, the rabbit's speed, the chicken and the rabbit's flight, the dragon's explosion, the sheep's soul leaving the body, the monkey's transformation. All these magical abilities that he had dreamed of in his previous life were all realized by him one by one. To be honest, the dragon talisman and the ox talisman are the most useless to me. Mu Chiu stood in the sky and couldn't help but comment on the 12 abilities she had just obtained. His Balrog avatar originally had the ability to control fire and was born with divine power, but these 2 abilities were the most useless for him. However, the horse charm can cure all diseases, and the dog's immortality is difficult for him to try for a while. After all, he couldn't really just kill him to see if he would die. Mu Chiu looked around and saw that there was no one around. A red light flashed in her eyes, and her body expanded rapidly. Roar! A huge red monster suddenly appeared in this dense mountain forest. The monster was several feet tall, with sharp fangs and claws, red eyes, and muscles all over its body. A dragon trailed behind it and swayed along with its huge body. 2 devil horns stood upright on its head, showing its majestic aura. Is this the Holy Lord? Mu Chiu looked at the body that was several times larger than the original Fire Demon Lord, checked the body's abnormality, spread out his palms and murmured. This is a rhythm that defies heaven. This body that is fused with the Holy Lord's demonic energy has completely inherited the Holy Lord's abilities. Except for the devil horns on the head and the red body, it is almost 70 to 80% similar to the original Holy Lord. Looking at the quiet and peaceful city of survivors in front of him, the red eyes of the Fire Demon Lord, transformed by Mu Chiu, narrowed slightly, and the turbulent murderous intention flashed in his eyes. Not good. Mu Chiu hurriedly patted her face and thought to herself, Tiger Talisman. In an instant, a kind of calm and clear thought came to his heart, and Mu Chiu's body shape changed from the original, Fire Demon Lord, back to the form of an ordinary person. Fortunately, at that moment, I couldn't control my thoughts and wanted to rush to the city below to kill everyone. The sudden surge in power not only made Mu Qiu excited like never before, but also inspired the vicious side of the Fire Demon Lord in Mu Qiu's heart. So Mu Qiu quickly used the Tiger Talisman's ability to reconcile Yin and Yang to seal the violent emotions deep in her heart, replacing them with the current, peaceful, state. He is not stupid enough to completely seal away the evil side in this apocalyptic era of cannibalism, and only retain the good side of the Virgin to seek death. Compared to my previous state, my current peaceful mood allows me to disguise myself better. Don't be surprised by changes. This is the state Mu Qiu needs more now. He traveled to this man-eating apocalypse as an ordinary person in his previous life, and suddenly devoured the memory of the Fire Demon Lord's abilities. He had just obtained the sign-in system and absorbed the Holy Lord's demonic energy. He experienced things that ordinary people would never experience in their lives in just 3 days. It was good that he didn't go crazy with excitement. Now he has a state of heart calm, which has really helped him stabilize his emotions a lot. The Great World Sign-in System. Thinking of the voice that just appeared in her mind, Mu Qiu murmured to herself. Unfortunately, there is still no response. It seems that this Roush subsystem will only appear when it reaches its designated check-in location. He did not forget his last words before the system disappeared. Nigga's mask? Xiaoshi couldn't help but feel a movement in her heart because of Mu Qiu's current calm state of mind. It seems that the system wants me to inherit all the Holy Lord's inheritance. Nijia Mask is one of the 9 masks of the Sealer Ghost General in The Adventures of Jackie Chan. It has the ability to summon the Shadow Core. If you get this mask, doesn't it mean you have an entire ninja army that works hard, doesn't eat or drink, and never betrays? Mu Qiu admitted that he was moved. But now, Mu Qiu's deep eyes turned back, as if she felt something, her body suddenly floated, and then flew directly towards the survivor camp ahead. Not long after Mu Qiu left, a rustling sound suddenly came from the woods behind. A team of well-equipped soldiers armed with heavy guns suddenly appeared on the hillside where Mu Qiu was just now. The leader of the team was the same guardian eagle who found Mu Qiu after tracking the Fire Demon Lord that day. Wei Ying looked at the jungle in front of him that had been destroyed into ruins, with a solemn expression in his eyes. You can't be wrong. The energy fluctuations just detected came from the S-class heretic who escaped from the laboratory a few days ago, the Fire Demon Lord. Next to Wei Ying, a white-haired man wearing black-rimmed glasses and a suit walked to the front of the site that was destroyed by the Fire Demon Lord to explore. He walked to Wei Ying calmly, with no expression on his face and said, "It's basically certain that the source of that weird energy comes from here." Wei Ying sighed and said, "He has become stronger again." The white-haired man looked outside the mountain. There was a city that had already become chaotic due to zombie riots. Before the end plan comes, he has no chance to evolve. After leaving the foot of the mountain, Mu Qiu immediately activated the invisibility ability of the snake charm. All because he is now in an awkward position. The body of the Fire Demon Lord was so huge that almost the moment he transformed, his clothes were torn to pieces, leaving only a few pitiful pieces of fabric covering his lower body. In other words, he is almost in a state of streaking now. The noise that just happened on the mountain was too big. Has it attracted the attention of the base? Mu Qiu's current understanding of this world is not deep enough, and there is no need for him to be hostile to these human survivors. Fire Demon Lord is only the boss in the red zone, but as far as he knows, in the black zone above the red zone in Yuhai City, there are several auras that make him, an S-level heretic, feel palpitations. The Fire Lord who evolved after devouring the Holy Lord's demonic energy should be enough to compete with those powerful monsters in the black area. As he spoke, the wind blew under Mu Qiu's feet, and she quickly rushed to an abandoned shopping mall at the foot of the mountain. The thick cold-proof clothing in these abandoned shopping malls had long been looted. Mu Chiu did a simple search and found a complete set of shirts to wear. After thinking about it, I found a black windbreaker and put it on outside. Mu Chiu took a look in the mirror, and saw that his handsome face looked much better than the sloppy look he had before. Now he looks a bit like a villain boss. Mu Chiu rubbed her chin, quite satisfied with her image. Return to your physical form and return to the nearby room of survivors. Survivors excavated in the ruins, like Mu Chiu, will be sent to safe areas for resettlement after undergoing strict infection tests. Survivors like them were all assigned to this group of houses at the foot of the mountain, separated only by a mountain from the chaotic ruins of the city. Once a zombie riot occurs, the first to be affected are these survivor rooms located on the edge of the base. As a result, countless people flock to it, scrambling to plunder resources, just to get the qualification to settle in a location close to the center of the base's safety zone. There was a comfortable environment and tight guards, and it was much safer than the housing areas on the edge. After returning to the room, Mu Chiu lay directly back on the bed and closed her eyes. It looks like he is pretending to be asleep, but in fact he has secretly activated the power of the sheep talisman. Out-of-body experience. Mu Chiu only felt that her whole body began to feel light, and soon she was floating in the air from the bed. When I opened my eyes, I realized that my body was still lying on the bed, and my spirit body was already floating in the sky. The survivors around me were even more unaware that I was a spirit body. Feeling that there was a mysterious connection between her soul and body, Mu Chiu tried to put her soul into her body. When he opened his eyes again, his soul returned to his body, and Mu Chiu regained control over his body. Mu Chiu felt relieved and used the ability to leave the body again. This time, the spirit body was floating in the air. No longer hesitating, Mu Chiu drove the spirit body through the wall this time and flew outside. Relying on the silent and invisible spirit state to overlook the base, Mu Chiu had a panoramic view of the true situation of the entire Jade Sea safe zone. The edge of Yuhai base is deserted, with only a few scattered groups of soldiers patrolling with guns. Going a little deeper, you can see some restored streets and alleys, and you can see some ragged homeless people here and there. There were very few women and children around, and they could travel freely on the streets. The neatly dressed pedestrians all looked faintly tired. Mu Chiu could vaguely feel the energy fluctuations of the awakened ones. Mu Chiu discovered that the deeper into the center of the base, the more awakened people she sensed, and most of them were in groups with huge energy. Mu Chiu was thoughtful, her spirit body hovering in the air. He discovered that his out-of-body ability was not as unlimited as in the original work. At most a few hundred miles away to half the Yuhai base, he felt that the connection between his soul and body was getting weaker and weaker. Realizing this, he did not dare to drive his spirit body to explore deeper, but only snooped near the center of the base. Suddenly, Mu Chiu sensed a strange energy fluctuation. Mu Chiu's heart moved, and the spirit body came to a tower near the southeast side of the center of the safe zone. In the tower, a group of mysterious people wearing purple robes were gathering together. On the carpet surrounded by the crowd, a six-pointed star pattern dyed with blood suddenly appeared. This group of weirdos gathered together as if they were performing some weird ritual. The leading purple-robed man lowered his head slightly and muttered words. Some obscure words came out of his mouth. The purple-robed men around him were all silent and said nothing. Mu Chiu felt a little strange, and immediately drove the spirit body forward, intending to find out what the purple-robed man was talking about. But at this moment, the head of the leader of the purple-robed man suddenly lifted up, and suddenly, an old face with a withered face and wrinkles that was about to die appeared in front of Mu Chiu. Who? The old man suddenly looked in Mu Chiu's direction. Immediately, a gleam of light seemed to flash in the old man's eyes, and a burst of invisible mental fluctuations struck towards Mu Chiu's spirit body like thunder. Mu Chiu's heart skipped a beat, and she felt inexplicably that this attack could hurt her soul, so she quickly urged her spirit body to escape through the wall. There was just a boom sound, and a huge hole was created in the thick and solid wall of the tower by this spirit. Mu Chiu hurriedly returned to her body, her face still filled with lingering fear the moment her soul returned to her body. At this time, the tiger talisman took effect, balancing Mu Chiu's panicked state of mind again. What really surprised me was that the old man in purple robe could detect the existence of the spirit body. It's unclear whether that spiritual attack can cause harm to me. It seems we still can't underestimate the awakened ones in the base. Mu Chiu calmed down and analyzed carefully for a moment. As for what rituals those mysterious purple-robed men were performing, it had nothing to do with the current Mu Chiu. As long as those purple-robed people don't come to trouble him, Mu Chiu won't feel uncomfortable doing nothing. So Mu Chiu closed his eyes with peace of mind. This time he really planned to take a rest. At noon, another soldier came to deliver food. The food was the same as in the past, it was still some rotten and moldy biscuits and bread. Strangely, what a soldier handed to Mu Chiu was not a moldy biscuit, but an unopened bag of purple rice bread and a piece of ham. Different from the situation in the morning, this time no survivors came to snatch the food, even if the food in Mu Chiu's hands was much better than the others. Soon, Mu Chiu finished eating the bread and ham amid the swallowing sounds of the survivors around him. In this way, until the afternoon, a group of soldiers came to the room where the survivors lived and took Mu Chiu away. Survivors were also brought out one after another from several surrounding rooms. Soon, under the leadership of the group of soldiers, Mu Chiu and his party arrived at a training camp near the edge of the safety zone. What is called a training camp is actually just a large stadium before the end of the world. After a simple transformation, it became the training ground of the Yuhai base. As soon as he entered, Mu Chiu saw that the entire venue was divided into several areas. And at the top of these areas, there is a platform. At this moment, there was a row of survivors like them standing below the platform. Mu Chiu counted them, and there were dozens of survivors in their group. Some survivors have strange appearances and different body shapes from ordinary people. Some survivors were tall, with bare faces, and even their palms were thick and dark, like bear paws. Some survivors have green faces and fangs that look like evil spirits, and they always have an evil smile on their lips, which can make people feel heartbroken just by looking at them. Mu Chiu and his party were taken to the platform by the soldiers and stood together with the dozens of survivors. There were more than a dozen men and women standing on the stage. Although they were not wearing uniforms, they were all neatly and brightly dressed, which was in sharp contrast to the shabby survivors in the audience. There are not many survivors coming this time. After all, it has been 2 years since the apocalypse broke out. It is becoming increasingly difficult to find survivors in the ruins. The probability of there being an awakened person inside is also very slim. I hope there are some good people inside. The search team's job is not going to be easy. These people were whispering on the stage, but Mu Chiu's hearing was so sharp that she directly captured the key information of what they said. Mu Chiu glanced towards the stage, and soon he spotted the pretty and graceful Wei Linger in the crowd. Wei Linger was also very happy after seeing Mu Chiu. She stood on tiptoes and waved to Mu Chiu, who also smiled back. However, during the moment of interacting with Wei Linger, Mu Chiu suddenly noticed a vicious gaze staring at her. Mu Chiu turned around and saw a strange man in the crowd. He had sparse eyebrows and a vulgar appearance. He was squinting his eyes and glancing towards her intentionally or unintentionally. Although the expression was very subtle, Mu Chiu was still keenly aware of the hostility in this man's eyes. I have never met him, why would he have such inexplicable hostility towards me? Mu Chiu thought to herself. At this moment, a burly man wearing a jet black leather vest on the platform glanced at the crowd and said, "Since you can stand here, Xiang must have been discovered to have supernatural powers and become one of the lucky few in this apocalyptic world, the awakened one." The eyes of many survivors in the audience were immediately attracted, and they all looked at the man in the vest with burning eyes. In this end of the world, having superpowers and becoming an awakened person means that you have the ticket to become a superior person. Money, women, status, fame and fortune, as long as you want it, these are all within your reach. But suddenly, the man in the vest's voice stopped and his eyes became fierce. Hearing him roar, veins popped up in his already burly body, and his already knotted muscles swelled even more. Thick hair began to grow on his face, and crisscrossing black lines spread across his body. There were several black lines on his forehead. The word king is vaguely painted on it, and even the hands have a pair of tiger claws, which are powerful and intimidating. In an instant, a tiger roar resounded throughout the training ground, shocking everyone in the audience and leaving them in a daze. Tiger roaring in the forest. The many survivors in the audience were all shocked by the tiger roaring in the forest style of the man in the vest. As if they had seen some ferocious beast, they looked frightened and stood uneasily. Some people even fell to the ground, crying. Mu Chiu stood where he was. Of course he would not be frightened by this hand. The roar of the man in the waistcoat was actually a kind of spiritual attack, which directly hit the human heart and caused such a terrifying effect. Even ordinary people who are more determined will not be affected too much. Mu Chiu looked around and saw that there were still a few people who were determined and unaffected. After secretly writing down these people, Mu Chiu looked at the man in a vest who was roaring on the stage again. At this moment, the man in the vest is completely different from ordinary people. His whole body is covered with brown hair, like a standing tiger. The man in the vest looked at the frightened survivors below and frowned. However, while enjoying superior rights, you must also endure more severe challenges than ordinary people. At this time, a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes next to the man in the waistcoat echoed. The discovered awakened ones will join our search team. The mission of the search team is to advance into dangerous ruins, explore intelligence, search for resources, survivors, eliminate heretics, etc. The man in the vest glanced at everyone, and you are about to become a member of the search team. We are your instructors and will also become your future commanders and comrades in arms. After a passionate speech, Mu Chiu and others were ordered to demonstrate their awakening powers one by one. Mu Chiu originally thought that there would be some professional equipment for testing, but it turned out that he was overthinking it. It has only been 2 years since the apocalypse broke out, and no matter how advanced the technology is, it is still far from being able to easily detect a person's abilities. It's just that dozens of people showed their abilities to the search team on the stage one by one. I saw the man in the vest looking at the man in the suit next to him. The man in the suit waved his hand, and the pile of soil in front of him automatically gathered into a 2-meter-tall native. Now start showing off your powers. The first person to activate his ability was able to assimilate with the surrounding rocks, and his body became as hard as steel and indestructible. I saw the stone man swooping forward suddenly, hitting the native man blankly, and directly smashed the native man into pieces. Yes, this ability is very suitable for serving as a human shield. We want Lao Yen. The middle-aged man in a suit next to the man in the vest saw this ability to assimilate rocks, his eyes lit up, and he asked the man in the vest directly for help. The woman in red on the side said angrily, "What's wrong, Lao Ma? Is your team the only one missing someone? Our team is also missing a forward." The man in vest called Lao Yen repeatedly stopped him. "Okay. Xiao Zhang and Lao Ma's team died in a battle with a heretic not long ago during a search mission. Let Lao Ma be the new recruit this time." The woman in red said angrily, "Okay, then if there are any good seedlings, please keep them for us." In this way, a human flesh transaction was completed. The man in the suit waved his hand again, and the natives who had just been smashed to pieces by the stone man reunited. Next. Immediately afterwards, Mu Chiu saw a variety of awakening powers. Some people became as strong as an ox, lifting and throwing a 2-meter-tall native. Some people awakened to powerful gravity control and crushed the natives to pieces in the air. What's even more amazing is that the awakened person with the superpower system has awakened the skill of proficiency in swordsmanship. With a flying sword flying, the native has been cut into several sections. Doesn't this mean you have become the current swordsman? Mu Qiu looked on in amazement. Of course, there are also some useless awakeners, such as someone who awakened the special ability of fried rice. What is more bizarre is that there is a man who can enlarge a certain part of his body several times, which makes many men envious. Mu Qiu thought to herself, should we go back and find an opportunity to swallow up this kid's superpower? As the survivors of Mu Qiu and his group have endless superpowers, the awakened members of the search team on the platform are also arguing endlessly. Steal people. Seeing the powerful abilities, the awakened ones on the stage inevitably started to fight for it, and some even promised huge profits to attract these newcomers, who had just entered the base. Soon, the people in front showed off their awakened powers one by one, and it was Mu Qiu's turn. Mu Qiu took a step forward and looked at the natives who were slowly gathering. Etc. At this moment, a high-pitched voice suddenly came from the platform. Mu Qiu looked up and saw that the owner of the voice was the wretched man with sinister features and sly eyes that he had observed earlier. Let me test this person. Before anyone else could agree, the man jumped down and shouted sternly at Mu Qiu, "Boy, you're the one who crippled my elder brother, right?" Mu Qiu was a little confused, but she heard the man with a wretched face continue. "I have been looking for my eldest brother in these ruins for 2 whole years. I never expected that when I see him again, you will have already disabled him. I will settle this account with you today." The wretched man's eyes flickered, his cheekbones bulged, and a cold murderous look flashed in his eyes. Only then did Mu Qiu remember that the eldest brother, in this wretched man's mouth was actually the fat man who tried to snatch food that morning and was destroyed by him. "So, you are here to seek revenge?" Mu Qiu said to the wretched man while looking at the stage at the same time. The boss, Lao Yen, originally wanted to say something, but when he heard that this wretched man actually had such a grudge against Mu Qiu, he stopped talking and narrowed his eyes and turned a deaf ear. The other awakened people in the search team had no intention of speaking. After all, they had to choose between a new awakened person and an experienced awakened person with extensive connections and strong strength. The result was already obvious. Suddenly, a voice like an oriole coming out of the valley came out from among the members of the search team. "Ma Kuan, are you trying to use your power for personal gain?" Wei Linger jumped down from the high platform and looked at the wretched man with a pair of smart eyes. "I brought Mu Qiu, do you want to go against me?" The wretched man's whole body suddenly bulged, and his skin turned strangely purple. A thick tail was dragged out from behind, and his mouth suddenly became sharp and protruding, with a slender tongue spitting back and forth. In the blink of an eye, this wretched man called Ma Kuan turned into a humanoid lizard. The lizard man narrowed his narrow red eyes and shouted at Wei Linger, "Wei Linger, get out of here, this is none of your business." Wei Linger jumped into the air with a cooing sound, her exquisite figure swung around, and a fluffy brown tail actually appeared behind her. The girl's pretty face has undergone some changes. There are a pair of shining tiger teeth on her lips, her bright eyes are like 2 crystal gems, and even a pair of small brown ears stand up on her head. Is this a cat girl? So cute. When many of the survivors present saw Wei Linger's transformation, they seemed to have awakened some strange otaku attributes, and they were immediately attracted by the cuteness. Mu Qiu also didn't expect that Wei Linger's special ability was to transform into a cat lady. But after thinking about it, this girl's out-of-the-box temperament is indeed suitable for awakening this ability. Seeing that the Catwoman transformed by Wei Linger and the lizard man transformed by the wretched man were about to confront each other, Mu Qiu shook her head and stepped forward. He has no intention of competing with this kind of miscellaneous fish. Mu Qiu, don't worry. Since I, Wei Linger, brought you here, you will naturally join my team. When Wei Linger saw Mu Qiu stepping forward, she thought the latter was worried about offending others and no team was willing to accept him, so she reminded him. It seems that because of her transformation into a cat lady, Wei Linger's voice has a bit of a coquettish tone. Mu Qiu laughed. This young lady seemed careless, but she was actually a considerate person at heart. Mu Qiu looked at the 2-meter-tall lizard man beside him and said calmly, "Your brother came to rob me of food first, so I punished him a little. Now you want to avenge your elder brother?" The lizard man spit out the letter and made a hoarse voice, "Stop talking nonsense to me. Boy, let me tell you, in this apocalypse, fists are the most important thing." Before he finished speaking, the lizard man suddenly swung his thick tail towards Mu Qiu like a poisonous whip. A huge sound broke through the air, and the strong pressure even made the air tremble. The sudden attack by the lizard men made many awakened people, including Wei Linger, unable to react. Everyone could only watch helplessly as this blow, which was enough to turn gold into rubble, was about to hit Mu Qiu's flesh and blood body. Boom! With a heavy blow, the wall behind Mu Qiu was shattered into rubble by the aftermath, dust flew, and smoke scattered. Some survivors who had no time to dodge were even injured by the broken rubble, causing great harm to Qiu. Everyone could almost imagine that when this whip like a giant python hit Mu Qiu's mortal body, there would be a scene of blood and flesh flying everywhere. But the next moment, the flying dust dissipated, and a scene that everyone expected appeared. The wall behind Mu Qiu collapsed, but Mu Qiu did not move at all. Mu Qiu raised his arm, and what he was holding in his right hand was the lizard man's giant trunk-like tail. The new awakener actually caught the giant tail of the lizard man Ma Kuan with his bare hands. Are you kidding? The woman in red next to Tiger Man, Lao Yan, opened her eyes wide and looked at Mu Qiu, who grabbed the lizard man's tail with some disbelief. His expression was calm and he didn't seem to be struggling at all. Looking back at Ma Kuan, his face is distorted and his blood vessels are bursting. He has obviously used all his strength. If I remember correctly, Ma Kuan is a B-level awakener, right? The man in suit also felt a little incredible and asked Lao Yan. A solemn look appeared on Lao Yan's face. He looked at Mu Qiu's indifferent face and nodded slowly. This kid is not like an ordinary awakened person who has not received professional training. Wei Linger's smart cat pupils were also full of doubts. When did Mu Qiu become so powerful? I remember he is not an awakener of the elemental system. The surrounding awakened people were talking a lot, and they were all frightened by Mu Qiu's strange power, but the next scene made them even more stunned. Mu Qiu lowered his head, with broken hair flying around, making it difficult to see his eyes. His indifferent voice could only be heard through the opening and closing of the corners of his mouth. You are right about one thing. Whether it is in the end of the world or in the past, fists are always the biggest truth. A shocking scene happened. Mu Qiu's palm actually condensed a layer of frost. As he spoke, this layer of frost extended along Mu Qiu's palm to the tail of the lizard man, and then spread to the lizard man's body at lightning speed. His whole body condensed into ice cubes in an instant. Freeze! The lizard man was frozen into an ice sculpture in the blink of an eye. Everyone was shocked and speechless by this scene, but they saw that the lizard man Ma Kuan had a ferocious expression, and his eyes still showed the fear before being frozen. Gulu! The sound of swallowing was heard, and the scene fell into a moment of calm. Finally, someone suddenly shouted in the crowd. Yuan, elemental system, this person is the awakener of the elemental system. As this man shouted, many awakened people suddenly realized and looked at Mu Qiu below with shocked eyes. Tiger Man, Lao Yan, was also a little shocked at this moment, and said, "It turns out to be a rare elemental awakener. Now we have found a treasure." More than that. The man in a suit echoed, with the ability to freeze Ma Kuan with just a raise of his hand, he is now at least a B-level awakener, or even, an A-level. Wei Linger was also dumbfounded. She didn't expect that a survivor she picked up from the ruins would be so powerful. Wei Linger came to Mu Qiu's side in a few jumps, and looked at Mu Qiu with a pair of smart eyes, her eyes filled with brilliance. I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Regarding Wei Linger's scrutiny, Mu Qiu smiled calmly and explained, I have been stuck in the supermarket before, and I don't know much about the outside world. The implication is, I have been practicing in seclusion before, and I didn't know you people outside were so weak. Wei Linger. Little handsome boy, your name is Mu Qiu, right? At this moment, a charming voice that was very different from Wei Linger came. Mu Qiu turned around and saw a woman in red on the stage walking over. This woman is wearing a red cheongsam, with her fair and slender thighs under the fork. The cheongsam outlines her voluptuous figure, but it has the bulges that should be raised and the curls that should be raised, much plumper than Wei Linger. The woman's face is also very charming, her smile is like a blooming rose, and a beauty mark under the corner of her eye adds a sense of charm. There is no doubt that this is a beauty, and even in this world, she would be a disaster for the country and the people. Lu Qianshan, what do you want to do? The arrival of the charming woman set off an alarm for Wei Linger, who suddenly ducked in front of Mu Qiu and looked warily at the enchanting figure in front of her. That look in her eyes was like that of a female cat protecting her food, ready to explode at any moment. Don't be so nervous, Linger. I just want to ask this handsome guy named Mu Qiu if he is interested in joining my team. The enchanting woman whom Wei Linger called Lu Qianshan, twisted her waist like a water snake and walked towards Mu Qiu, but was stopped by Wei Linger. Stop dreaming, I brought Mu Qiu back to the base, and she has already joined my team. Wei Linger scolded angrily, and then looked at Mu Qiu, raised her head and said, Mu Qiu, don't you think so? Although it was a question, it was in an affirmative tone and showed its pointed little tiger teeth, as if it would bite you to death if you were not sure. Mu Qiu nodded quickly. Compared with these unfamiliar people, following Wei Linger seems to be a good choice. Unexpectedly, Lu Qianshan still refused to give in. She walked around Wei Linger and came to Mu Qiu's side, saying softly, Little handsome boy, there are many benefits to coming to my sister's side. The red lips rested next to Mu Qiu's ear, and they were so charming. A pair of watery eyes stared directly at Mu Qiu, which was breathtaking and fascinating. Hey! What do you want to do, Vixen? Wei Linger immediately became furious and waved her sharp cat claws to attack Lu Qianshan. Okay, Linger. Lao Yen spoke up to stop Wei Linger, and then the other awakened people came down from the stage and looked at Mu Qiu with eyes filled with greed. Yes, Mu Qiu read it right. The eyes of the members of the search team looking at him were full of desire called greed. What does it mean if an awakened person of the elemental system is cultivated? Even the lowest elemental system has powerful destructive power once awakened, which is several times higher than the ordinary mutation system and superpower system at the beginning. If there is a powerful elemental awakener accompanying the team, it can provide a strong survival guarantee for the entire team of awakeners. Hello, little brother, I am Wang Minglang from the survival team. Now I sincerely invite you to join our team. We can discuss the salary issues in detail. The middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes just handed Mu Qiu a business card, and then extended an olive branch to Mu Qiu. Immediately afterwards, Mu Qiu received all kinds of invitations. Some promised huge sums of money, and were tempted by beautiful women. Some promised that Mu Qiu would be given a set of real estate in a safe zone if she joined. Mu Qiu, similarly, you are welcome to join my wolf warrior team. The tiger man Lao Yen also started to recruit Mu Qiu. Of course, no matter what, the final choice is still yours. The survivors in the same batch as Mu Qiu looked at each other, and they were left alone. Looking at Mu Qiu, who was like a star holding the moon, the others all hated why they had not awakened the elemental power. Forehead. Mu Qiu was surrounded by a group of awakened people, and many benefits were showered on him. In the end, he shook his head and said, Thank you for your kindness. I'd better join Wei Linger's team. Seeing this, everyone could only return with regret. Only the Chongsam beauty Lu Chanshan still refused to let go, wrapping around Mu Chio's waist like a water snake, and said softly, "Are you really not thinking about it anymore? Sister, I can talk to you alone." Lu Chanshan twirled her hair and looked directly at Mu Chio with a pair of seductive eyes. The moment they looked at each other, Mu Chio was deeply involved and couldn't help but want to nod. Not good. Mu Chio quickly activated the power of the tiger talisman and then calmed down the throbbing in her heart. Mu Chio looked at Lu Chanshan with calm eyes. This woman must have used a charm-type power just now to make her lose her mind. When Lu Chanshan saw Mu Chio's reaction, she realized that her charm had failed, and she immediately turned around and left. Before leaving, Lu Chanshan tapped her fair jade hand on her cinnabar-like red lips, and blew a kiss to Mu Chio from afar. "Little brother, when did you change your mind? Sister, you are always welcome here." Soon, the remaining survivors also showed their own special abilities. Some powerful abilities were all divided up and absorbed by the search team. Of course, there was no elemental system as powerful as Mu Chio among the remaining people. Once the Awakener test was over, Mu Chio was hurriedly taken away by Wei Linger, unlike the other survivors who were uniformly taken away. Not bad. Mu Chio, it's not in vain that I have tried so hard to win over you. At this moment, Wei Linger cancelled her transformed civet form and walked on the street like a girl next door. Judging from the way she jumped, she was obviously very happy with Mu Chio's performance today. Mu Chio expressed helplessness about this. After all, he came to this Yuhai safe zone without help and blindly joined a team. What if he was bullied by bad guys? Wei Linger, an innocent girl, seems to be more fooled. She has too many secrets, so she should keep a lower profile. By the way, even though I was prepared that you are an awakener of the elemental system, I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Wei Linger suddenly turned around, raised the corners of her mouth, and said with a smile, "With your qualifications, maybe you can become the guardian of the base in the future." Guardian? Mu Chio frowned. You should know that after the apocalypse, many people awakened their superpowers after being infected with the virus, but there are no clear criteria for classifying these superpowers. So people classified all powers into different levels according to the level of energy. Wei Linger raised her head and looked at Mu Chio, speaking seriously. D-level awakeners are basically the energy level of all awakeners when they first awaken their powers. After becoming A-level awakeners, they are already strong in their own right. What about those above a level? Mu Chio suddenly asked. Some time ago, the base sent a large number of personnel to capture an S-class heretic, the Fire Demon Lord. Hey, what's wrong with you? Wei Linger said, seemingly noticing Mu Chio's unnaturalness. Mu Chio had a lump in her throat and said hurriedly, it's okay, just keep talking. Wei Linger was a little confused, but continued, at that time, in order to capture an S-class heretic, the base paid a huge price. The elite team of more than 1,000 people and hundreds of awakened people were almost defeated. Only half of the time did he capture the Fire Demon Lord alive. The scientists originally wanted to use the S-class Fire Lord to conduct experiments, but unfortunately they let him escape in the end. Mu Chio suddenly had cold sweat dripping down his forehead. If he was discovered, wouldn't he be committing suicide? He quickly changed the subject, then what level is beyond S level? He remembered that in the black area above the red area, there was an aura that made even the Fire Demon Lord at that time tremble. Wei Linger suddenly stopped and her face looked a little solemn. What's above the S level is the destruction level. The destructive level strong man is the guardian I just told you about. If you can protect the safety of a city with one person's power, you are a guardian. The guardians are all awakened ones beyond S level. Wei Linger nodded and continued, our Yuhai base now has 3 guardians. The reason why the Jade Sea safe zone can have a place in the apocalypse and recruit survivors from the surrounding areas is due to these 3 guardians. Mu Qiu secretly felt lucky. Fortunately, he did not blindly become arrogant and go against the base based on his increased strength. Otherwise, the strength of the 3 destructive-level demons would be too much for even his evolved fire demon lord. What are the identities of these 3 guardians in the base? Mu Qiu was a little curious. Wei Ling'er was silent for a moment, with a rare gloomy look on her pretty face. The entire Yuhai base still has no clear leader. To be precise, it is not the only one. The base is now divided and controlled by 3 major forces. After the apocalypse, the bosses of the 3 forces jointly established the Yuhai safe zone, and each has destructive power in their hands. They are the real Earth Emperors of Yuhai. At the same time, in a building in the center of Yuhai's safety zone. This is a luxuriously decorated office with a level of magnificence that is rare even before the end of the world. Oh. So that elemental awakener has joined Wei Ling'er's team. In the office, a middle-aged man with a fat body and a big belly was sitting on a mink chair, and in front of him stood a man in a suit and leather shoes. If Mu Qiu were present, he would definitely recognize this person as the middle-aged man who had handed him his business card in the training ground with the intention of recruiting him. The man in the suit nodded. It seems that this awakened person was brought back from the ruins outside the city. Our people have not received any news. The fat middle-aged man was half leaning on the backrest and said thoughtfully, if I remember correctly, this Wei Ling'er is Wei Ying's sister, right? Wei Ying is Xiao Hanyan's man, so Xiao Hanyan has another potential stock. The middle-aged man has a bloated figure, and even loose clothes cannot hide his fat belly. Only a pair of eyes shone with shrewd light, and then he waved his hands freely and said. Forget it, at least I didn't fall into the hands of that madman Wang Depeng, otherwise wouldn't he be even more lawless in the future? After saying that, the middle-aged man stood up from the mink chair, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of the building, and squinted his shrewd eyes to look out the window. The place seemed calm and peaceful, no different from before the apocalypse. The only difference was that there were very few pedestrians on the street, and most of them were in ragged clothes and walking in a hurry. The rich man's face showed a solemn look. I don't know how long this tranquility can last. Zhang Qingwei, one of the 3 leaders of Yuhai base, was a shrewd businessman before the apocalypse, and he was very wealthy. After the apocalypse broke out, he awakened the power of treasure hunting, and used this to organize his subordinates to collect a large amount of resources. He soon became the dominant force leader. But the most terrifying of the 3 is Wang Depeng, who is called a madman. Wei Ling'er's expression suddenly became a little strange, and she reminded Mu Qiu. If you meet Wang Depeng, it's best not to have too much contact with him. How do you say it? Mu Qiu asked. He didn't understand why Wei Ling'er had such a strange reaction when Wang Depeng was mentioned. Wei Ling'er looked around, suddenly stood up on tiptoes and whispered to Mu Qiu. Wang Depeng was an unlearned little gangster before the end of the world. When the end of the world came, he had some good luck and awakened his superpower. With his ruthless personality, he quickly gained a foothold in the apocalypse. Later, he gathered a group of gangsters around him. His strength also increased by leaps and bounds, and he soon became one of the 3 giants of Yuhai. The Ma Kuan who is against you today is Wang Depeng's subordinate. He is a cruel and crazy person. He is cruel in dealing with humans and zombies. He is also narrow-minded and will retaliate. In short, you must be careful about this person. Mu Qiu nodded. If Wang Depeng didn't cause trouble for him, he wouldn't do it for nothing. What about another one? When it came to the last leader, Wei Ling'er's tone became obviously much lighter and she said happily. The last leader of the Yuhai safe zone is Sister Hanyan. Sister Hanyan came from a military family. After the apocalypse began, she led the surviving army soldiers to rescue the survivors, and later recruited and expanded the troops among the survivors. The reason why the soldiers at Yuhai base now have these comprehensive standard equipment is all thanks to Sister Hanyan's help. Mu Qiu understood, In other words, the three leaders each have different divisions of labor in the base and jointly establish a safe zone for survivors. Wei Ling'er nodded. Sister Han Yan organizes manpower and trains soldiers in the base, and the task of the awakened team like us is to explore the ruins and eliminate the heretics. The two of them walked and talked like this, and Mu Qiu soon discovered that the closer to the center of the Jade Sea safety zone, the more survivors there were on the roadside. Most of them were wearing shabby clothes, and some even set up tents with some rags on the spot. These tents are full of holes and potholes, and obviously cannot provide even the most basic shelter from wind and rain, but these people still live in them happily. It was already approaching meal time, and Mu Qiu saw a stall in front of her. A group of survivors had already lined up in front of the stall, their bowls filled with rice paste-like food. Sensing Mu Qiu's gaze, Wei Ling'er explained, "These people are survivors who escaped from other urban areas. They have no fixed place to live and can only live in the safe zone." At this point, Wei Ling'er's tone paused before continuing, "But at least, it's much safer here than in the resettlement area on the edge, isn't it?" Mu Qiu said nothing because after seeing these groups of humans, the cruel consciousness belonging to the fire demon lord in his body began to stir again. Eat blood, drink enough blood, eat flesh and blood alive. Swallow. Swallow. Eat them. Violent and bloody thoughts kept echoing in his mind, and he seemed to have seen the scene of blood and flesh splattering on the crowd in front of him. A red light flashed in Mu Qiu's eyes, and he was trying his best to use the tiger talisman to suppress the anger in his heart. Wei Ling'er saw him frozen in place, staring blankly at the groups of refugees, with fine beads of sweat on his forehead, and thought Mu Qiu felt compassion after seeing this scene. In order to ease the atmosphere, Wei Ling'er said with a smile, "Don't worry, maybe you will become a destructive level powerhouse in the future and eliminate the heretics around you, so that these survivors can live a good life." Mu Qiu had just recovered from her violent emotions, but she didn't expect that the evolved fire demon lord's consciousness was so powerful, and the tiger talisman could only barely suppress the dark side in his heart. After hearing Wei Ling'er's words of persuasion, Mu Qiu smiled and remained non-committal. "If I don't eat them, I'm deliberately being patient, right?" Wei Ling'er suddenly smiled. "Suddenly I feel like I am an NPC in Novice Village." Mu Qiu was stunned, then smiled and said, "So I am a newbie who has just arrived in Novice Village. But I believe you have the potential to grow into a full-level boss." Wei Ling'er blinked at Mu Qiu and walked forward with Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu looked at Wei Ling'er's slender figure, and couldn't help but think of the berserk fire demon lord, and murmured, "I'm afraid I will be the final big boss." He didn't know that as his strength gradually increased, whether the power of a tiger charm alone could restrain the violent and bloodthirsty emotions in his body. If you cannot suppress the consciousness of the Fire Lord in your body and release the Berserk Fire Lord, then the entire base will turn into a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Mu Qiu shook his head. He was a little unsure whether it was good or bad for him to stay in the human world. Soon, under the leadership of Wei Ling'er, Mu Qiu arrived in front of a row of villas in the wealthy area of Yuhai City before the apocalypse. Wei Ling'er approached a two-story villa, took out the key, opened the door and walked in. Mu Qiu was a little confused, but still followed in. The villa is a two-story building as a whole, with exquisite decoration inside, a high-ceiling foyer, and a wide floor-to-ceiling window on the balcony on the second floor, which can just overlook a lot in the distance. The overall decoration is not as luxurious as ordinary villas, but it is more elegant. Wei Ling'er took Mu Qiu for a brief walk around and suddenly said, "How is it? This house is pretty good, isn't it?" As soon as he finished speaking, when Mu Qiu was confused about what he meant, Wei Ling'er threw the key in her hand to Mu Qiu. Here it is for you." Mu Qiu was a little surprised this time. Although these properties are no longer valuable in the end of the world, this place is in a safe zone after all. Even looking at the entire Yuhai base, it is located in the golden zone in the center. It is heavily guarded and is even more precious in the end of the world. He really didn't expect that Wei Linger would give it to him so easily. Did you rob the house? Wei Linger rolled her eyes at Mu Qiu, and then said, don't think too much, this is a property I owned in Yuhai before the end of the world, and now I give it to you. Mu Qiu didn't expect that Wei Linger was a wealthy woman who was secretly wealthy. This property was very good in terms of location and floor plan. The price before the apocalypse would have been 7 figures at least. Does anyone who joins your team receive this kind of treatment? Mu Qiu asked. What a beautiful thought. Wei Linger rolled her eyes, this is a reward for your good performance today. An awakened person of the elemental system is still worthy of my investment. Mu Qiu was once again glad that she rejected the solicitation from other teams today. You must know that this eldest lady is a bit difficult to deal with. Cats with fried fur are generally vindictive. With that said, Wei Linger took out a cloth bag from her waist and handed it to Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu opened the bag and saw several bottle-sized white crystals inside, with a blue gem-like crystal at the bottom. Sensing Mu Qiu's confused gaze, Wei Linger explained, this is the energy crystal core obtained from the mutated zombie heretic. In addition to activating the supernatural energy in the body after practicing, the method for awakeners to advance can also be to improve their supernatural abilities by absorbing these energy crystal nuclei. It's just that relying on absorbing crystal nuclei to advance is ultimately an external force. The energy efficiency absorbed is too low, and the output of crystal nuclei is still a matter of probability. The energy crystal nuclei themselves are also extremely precious. The cores produced by the lowest level zombies are white, and the color of the cores produced by higher level zombies will also change accordingly. Crystal cores can also be used as hard currency in the base, so you have to cherish them. Consider this a gift package for you as a newbie. How about it? I'm pretty competent as an NPC, right? After hearing Wei Linger's explanation, Mu Qiu couldn't help but admire this maintainer of order in the base. Although there are still many survivors in this huge base who are hungry, it is really not easy to establish such a system in just 2 years after the outbreak of the apocalypse. In the past few days, you can go to the training ground to practice your abilities. In 3 days, our team will conduct a collective mission. By then, you will have met the other members of the team. Wei Linger explained to Mu Qiu again, and then left the villa. Before leaving, Mu Qiu asked Wei Linger if she knew where the Daishiandi Entertainment Club was. He was still worried about where the system would check in next. Wei Linger looked at him with strange eyes and said, Entertainment Club. One look at Wei Linger looked like she didn't know, so Mu Qiu hurriedly waved her hands away, but the former's expression looked even weirder. After Wei Linger left, Mu Qiu looked at the bag of energy crystal cores in her hand. He picked up a white crystal core and did not use the ability to devour it, but instead activated the energy within his body. Soon, Mu Qiu felt an energy coming out of the crystal core and flowing into his body along the palm of his hand. It's just that this energy is very small, and the improvement effect on yourself is better than nothing. Really? Mu Qiu had already known in her heart that the energy gained from absorbing the crystal core was far inferior to that of swallowing it directly. Although the crystal core is said to be the source of the abilities of the infected heretics, the energy contained in it has already been used to transform their bodies. The remaining energy in the crystal core can only be said to be the few potentials hidden in the body. This is like an experience bar. There may be dozens of experience points gained from directly devouring flesh and blood essence, but if it is converted into crystal nuclei and then absorbed, there will only be a few points left. Since the crystal core can't improve much strength, it's better to keep it for currency transactions. Mu Qiu put away the bag and began to look at her own small villa. Living alone in a small 2-story building seemed a bit empty. Mu Qiu walked along the escalator to the floor-to-ceiling balcony window on the 2nd floor. Mu Qiu looked into the distance and saw that the sun was setting and she could faintly see the skyline. There were a few faint smoke drifting in the distance. Below, there were more groups of disaster-stricken survivors receiving relief. Mu Qiu could vaguely sense that there were several eyes peering towards the villa, but he paid no attention to these watchers. It's almost time to stretch your arms and legs. After saying this, Mu Qiu stretched out and secretly activated the monkey talisman's ability. Suddenly a halo of light flashed in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, gradually surrounding Mu Qiu. In the blink of an eye, the halo dissipated, and a bird spread its wings and flew out of the halo, while Mu Qiu's figure disappeared from the spot. Yuhai Base, in a tall building. A heroic beauty in military uniform was looking through some photos in her hand and said casually to Wei Ying next to her. The elemental awakener named Mu Qiu has now joined Linger's team. Wei Ying looked slightly excited and replied, "Yes, we hid the news very well before. This awakened person is extremely powerful. He defeated the B-level awakened person Ma Kun at the training ground today. This kind of potential will even increase in the future. It is possible to reach the level of destruction." After all, Mu Qiu was the one he discovered first, and it was his sister who brought him back to the base. He was honored to bring back a seed-level awakener to the base. After hearing the news, the woman in military uniform did not show any joy. Instead, she pondered for a moment, looked at a white-haired man on the other side, and said, "Is there any problem with him?" The white-haired man held up the black frame and said, "According to my observations during this period, this man is quite honest. He has not been out since he was sent to his residence by Wei Linger today. He does not carry any communication equipment with him, and I don't think there are forces willing to send an awakened person with such potential to be a spy." The woman in military uniform nodded after hearing the white-haired man's analysis, and said calmly, "Continue to observe for a while, and then cancel the manpower after making sure there are no problems. After all, no matter how rare the element system is, it is still only a potential stock and does not surpass the real S level. Even if it can attract a certain amount of attention, it is nothing more." And this woman in military uniform is none other than Xiao Hanyan, one of the 3 giants in Yuhai Base. Xiao Hanyan asked Wei Ying and the white-haired man some questions, and suddenly seemed to realize something and said, "Is Wang Depeng coming back soon?" When the name Wang Depeng was mentioned, Wei Ying and the white-haired man were also stunned. The white-haired man reluctantly said, "It's been half a month since Captain Wang led his men to search for the ruins. Counting the days, it's really time to come back. That madman." There was a bang sound, and Wei Ying, who had always behaved maturely and steadily, slapped his palm on the table and said angrily, "Colonel, we can no longer tolerate this madman allowing his subordinates to disrupt the order of Yuhai. Since the establishment of the Yuhai safe zone, how many survivors have been bullied and oppressed by Wang Depeng's men? Every time our people want to control it, they are violently oppressed by Wang Depeng. The scourge of Wang Depeng in the Yuhai base is simply more dangerous than the zombie heresy outside." Wei Ying vented his grievances in front of Xiao Hanyan, but Xiao Hanyan seemed extra calm, his handsome eyebrows slightly frowned. After a long while, Xiao Hanyan, who thought for a moment, shook his head and sighed, "The Yuhai safe zone has just stabilized, now is not the time to fight with Wang Depeng. Zhang Dawei is a greedy businessman who can't afford to do anything early. He may not be on our side by then. This damn world." Xiao Hanyan obviously didn't want to continue on this topic, so he asked instead, "How is Miao Miao doing these days?" The white-haired man replied, "Miao Miao is still unwilling to communicate with others. We tried to find a few peers to contact her, but the effect was still not ideal." Xiao Hanyan's expression became a little serious at this moment. "We must stabilize Miao Miao, the redemption plan is coming, we can't make any mistakes here." At dusk and sunset, the outline of the sun has gradually dropped below the horizon. In the gradually darkening sky, a bird spread its wings across the sky. Until now, Mu Qiu could have an overview of the entire Jade Sea safety zone. The Yuhai safe zone is modeled on the original Yuhai base, and has expanded the territory within a certain range around it. It uses mountains as natural barriers, and in front is a thick, city wall, several meters high that has been erected by the awakened ones using supernatural powers. It's a bit like the city wall barrier in a certain giant, but it's much lower than the previous one, and can barely block the attack of ordinary zombie groups. The bird transformed by Mu Qiu flapped its wings and flew high, passing through the towering buildings, and finally landed in the ruins of a city hundreds of kilometers away from the Yuhai safety zone. The bird landed on the rooftop of a building, and a halo of light flashed across. Mu Qiu, dressed in black robe, stood on the eaves of the rooftop, looking down from a distance. The cracked earth is devastated, and the streets that have long been reduced to ruins are filled with zombies like walking corpses, who are roaring crazily due to hunger. The soulless and hollow eyes, the mouth that was so wide that it was dislocated revealed an endless desire for flesh and blood. The ferocious face, twisted and twitching limbs, and the old blood stains on the clothes conveyed to the deepest heart of the heart all the time of fear. Night is coming. Compared to the scorching sun during the day, night is the time when these heretics are more active. Looking at the group of zombies roaring on the ground like wild beasts, Mu Qiu shook her head. As expected, I still have no intention of getting along with these zombie-like monsters. Human society is his true destination. Call. A gust of breeze blew by, causing the black windbreaker to sway. Mu Qiu stood on the eaves with a calm expression, as if the group of terrifying zombies below that made ordinary people tremble could not cause the slightest disturbance in his heart. Suddenly, Mu Qiu bent down and jumped into the air, her figure turning into an afterimage in the air, as if a black shadow had fallen from a 10-story building. The black robe was fluttering, and as the blurry black figure continued to fall, Mu Qiu's figure continued to expand in midair. In the blink of an eye, a ferocious monster with red skin, tangled muscles, and the body of a dragon appeared in midair. The dragon-headed monster roared, with a huge roar that shook the sky and cracked the earth, and then it hit the ground like thunder. There were several loud booms, in succession, like a thunderbolt from the blue, and a huge deep pit was instantly smashed into the ground paved with solidified asphalt. Countless zombies on the street were attracted by the thunderous roars and rumblings, and rushed toward the pit. But then, a pillar of fire erupted from the deep pit underground, as if a roaring fire dragon had risen from the ground, swallowing the sky and the earth. A group of zombies near the pit were directly burned into charcoal dregs by the fierce flames. Roar! Hong Zhongdalu's roar once again shocked the whole world. After the pillar of fire dissipated, a huge monster with red skin, a dragon's head and body was looking up to the sky and roaring ferociously, standing surrounded by corpses. This terrifying monster several feet tall is the fire demon lord transformed by Mu Qiu. Roar! A loud roar was like a thunderbolt from the blue, and the fire demon lord opened a pair of giant claws and grabbed a zombie on the roadside. Then, the Balrog's palm exerted force and clenched suddenly. The zombie was instantly crushed by the huge force. In an instant, blood spattered and blood mist filled the sky. Immediately afterwards, the monster-like body of the Fire Lord suddenly jumped up from the pit, and in the blink of an eye he had already reached the neighborhood where corpses were strewn. Sharp claws picked up several zombies sideways, and with a puff sound, the ground was soaked in large swaths of blood. As if being stimulated by the blood, the Fire Demon Lord's eyes were filled with red color, he opened his bloody mouth, revealing his ferocious fangs, and a ball of crimson flames instantly spurted out from his mouth. Like the dawn of dawn, a pillar of red flames several feet long instantly swallowed up everything visible in front of it, and illuminated this dim neighborhood like a lonely night lamp. Looking around, the streets were already in ruins, and the strong smell of blood permeated the entire neighborhood. But the strange thing was that the streets were surprisingly silent at this moment, leaving only the heavy breathing of the Fire Demon Lord, and the only sound in the air. There was a strong smell of blood and the burning smell of moxibustion. The sun that is about to set on the skyline reflects the entire street into the twilight of dusk. The crimson sunlight is mixed with the bloody scene of corpses strewn in the fields, which together form a picture of killing that is unique to Mu Chiu. Between the blood-colored light curtains, the blood-soaked figure of the fire demon lord was reflected in it, surrounded by broken corpses and charred bones. Laugh. Suddenly, the ground beneath the fire lord's feet suddenly cracked, and the cracked earth wrapped around the fire lord's huge body and instantly sank deep into it. The next moment, a huge centipede with a body length of more than 10 meters sprang out from the ground, spitting out dark green venom from its mouth, and at the same time, waving its sharp limbs to stab the Balrog's eyes like lightning. The red color in the fire demon lord's eyes became even darker. His body did not move at all, but he just raised his arm. There was only a clang sound, and the sharp limbs of the centipede pierced the flesh and blood of the Balrog's arm, making a strange sound of gold and iron clashing, but the limb did not advance even an inch. At the same time, two beams of fiery red laser gold light shot out from the eyes of the fire demon lord, directly piercing the dark green venom sprayed by the giant centipede, and directly shot through the centipede's mouthparts. The giant centipede let out a mournful cry, and the hooks on both sides of its body began to dance wildly. However, the fire demon lord stretched out his red palm and instantly wrapped the centipede's head. His arms exploded like blood mist, and condensed into a ball of bloody vines in an instant. Wrapped the centipede's head tightly. The giant centipede began to struggle violently, and the essence in its body was continuously absorbed. Blood visible to the naked eye flowed among the bloody vines formed on its arms. Within a few breaths, this huge centipede, which was several feet long, shriveled up and was sucked into a withered state. Throwing the mummy in his hand to the ground, the fire demon lord's body swelled and he groaned. At this moment, the zombies who survived this devastating disaster in the distance felt the terrifying aura emanating from the fire lord. Their bodies, which were originally fearless, started to tremble, and they howled unconsciously, roar. Roar. This is the trembling from the bone marrow of low-end creatures, involuntary surrender to the superior. In an apartment in Yuhai Security Zone. Asshole. A man with a wretched face and a mustache turned red and smashed the glass on the table in front of him. Hey Ma Kuan, what happened today made you famous in the search team? You were actually taught a lesson by a newbie. You are really promising. A man dressed gloriously and dressed like a gangster was leaning against the wall, holding a dagger in his hand and a sarcastic smile on his face. And the man with the mustache was Ma Kuan, the lizard man who was frozen by Mu Chiu using his ice power in the afternoon. You know nothing. That Mu Chiu is not a simple guy, he is definitely not a novice. Veins popped up on Ma Kuan's forehead, and his expression looked a little ferocious. At the moment he was frozen, I could feel the murderous intent in his eyes. I almost thought I was dead. This is definitely not in the ruins. What ordinary survivors have? Come on. That Mu Chiu has already surrendered to that bitch Xiao Hanyan, and an awakened elementalist must not be treated like a treasure. The gangster wielded a knife with an expression on his face. Somewhat disdainful. Wait. I must find this place back. Counting the days, it's time for Boss Wong to come back. Boss Xiangbi will also be very interested in an awakener of the ice element. Ma Kuan suddenly laughed, stretched out his tongue and licked his lips, a glimmer of light appeared in his eyes. Late at night, the evening wind blew through the silent and deserted city ruins, and the stars in the night sky were shining with silver light. A crescent moon was shining in the sky, dimly illuminating Mu Chiu who was sitting on the top of a row of tall buildings. At this time, Mu Chiu had returned to human form, and the clothes on her upper body had burst during the transformation. Mu Chiu was seen sitting on the roof of a dozen-story building, with her legs dangling in the air, wearing a black windbreaker, and her naked upper body vaguely revealing her strong abdominal muscles. After wiping the blood on another yellow crystal core in his hand, Mu Chiu threw it into a bag full of crystal cores. Mu Chiu turned her gaze to the dense group of zombies below. The low-end zombies are irrational and rely on instinct to search for prey like hungry beasts in the dark night. The whining and roaring sounds from their throats from time to time form a concerto unique to the Walking Dead in this long night. Sure enough, it's too hard for me to associate with these walking zombies. Looking at the civilized society below that was completely dehumanized, Mu Chiu shook her head. In comparison, Yuhai Safe Zone is like a paradise on Earth. I couldn't help but feel a slight sense of appreciation for the leadership of the Yuhai Safety Zone. To re-establish a long-lost social order, even if it is only a short-term construction, this process must be extremely difficult. Tonight's massacre was more like a hunting game for Mu Chiu, not only to familiarize himself with the newly acquired abilities and use them flexibly, but also to indulge the dark side of the Fire Demon Lord in his body. As the saying goes, it's better to block than to open up. After a night of carnival feast, the violent mood of the Fire Demon Lord has obviously eased a lot, and he has calmed down without using the suppression ability of the Tiger Talisman. This situation is like that of a child who goes to bed when he is full. After all, I ate dozens of heretics tonight. It should be enough for Balrog to digest them for a while. Mu Chiu looked up at the moon and suddenly felt that the dark world below had become a little boring. Standing up, the black robe she was wearing fluttered. Mu Chiu flew up, stood in the air, looked at the boundary of the Jade Sea Safety Zone in the distance and said, "It's almost time to go back." The first ray of sunlight in the morning shone through the window. Mu Chiu slowly opened her eyes and stood up from Simon's thick mattress. Opening the expensive silk curtains, Mu Chiu stood in front of a person-high transparent floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor of the villa. Outside the window was bright and warm sunshine. To be honest, this was Mu Chiu's first time staying in such a high-end villa. Looking at the wisps of sunshine outside the window, Mu Chiu couldn't help but sigh. At least in terms of maintaining order, the senior officials of the Yuhai Safety Zone have done their best. Just from the surface, it is difficult to tell that this is a terrifying apocalypse where zombies are everywhere and heretics are rampant. After the last lesson, Mu Chiu no longer dared to use the Sheep Talisman's ability to leave the body to spy on the base. After all, his ability is still weak in the soul field. God knows there are other awakened people in the base who are good at the soul field. Ever since she learned that there were 3 destructive level awakeners in the base, Mu Chiu understood the principle of being a human in a low-key manner, and secretly warned herself not to be so reckless anymore. After taking a short rest, Mu Chiu put on his black windbreaker again and walked out of the villa area. Survivors in the safety zone currently have 2 ways of eating. One is the relief food that ordinary people can receive, but this food is usually based on some expired food and rice porridge soup made with wild vegetables and old grains. It is difficult to even have enough food and clothing, let alone any nutrition at all. Awakened ones with some strength will use the crystal nuclei obtained by hunting in the ruins to exchange for some canned hams before the end of the world. This is already a quite luxurious food in the end of the world. Nowadays, crystal cores have long replaced the currency before the end of the world. Because of their special functions, they are widely traded in the circle of awakened people. In the world of survivors, just a few white crystal cores are a huge sum of money, enough to make a family rich. I won't have to worry about food and drink for a few days. The 2-story villa that Wei Linger gave to Mu Chiu belongs to the classic wealthy area in the Yuhai Safe Zone, and is basically populated by post-apocalyptic awakened people. The original residents of the villa have either turned into irrational zombies, or transferred the house for a few good meals. This is the change of money and power after the end of the world. The sudden outbreak of the Doomsday virus has caused earth-shaking changes in people with different identities in the past. Perhaps in the eyes of some people, this doomsday disaster has caused those destined to be ordinary people to embark on the road to becoming kings. When I came to a stall on the roadside, the stall owner was a young man with shabby clothes, dark skin, and scars on his face. Although he is a bit dusty, he looks strong and full of heaven. It is obvious that he is also an awakened person with supernatural powers. The stalls sell a variety of things, including canned beef found in the ruins, self-heating hot pot, instant noodles, weapons like daggers and knives, and even some brand-name clothes. It was obvious that this awakened person also followed the team to search for resources from the ruins, and then returned to the Jade Sea safe zone to trade goods. Mu Chiu looked through it briefly, picked out food such as ham bread, and took out a dagger. She asked seemingly casually, "Is there a map of the surrounding areas of Yuhai City? It's best to have detailed ones. That kind of thing." The stall owner looked at Mu Chiu in confusion and said, "Hey, buddy, in what age are people still using paper maps? Just tell me where you want to go. I was born and raised in Yuhai before the end of the world. I can remember any large shopping mall or supermarket, Men Chinger." After saying that, he rubbed his fingers again and looked at Mu Chiu. "Of course, this information is not free. What do you think of a white crystal?" Mu Chiu nodded. He didn't want to care about such a trivial matter. He just threw a few white crystal cores over and asked, "Do you know where the Dadiandi Entertainment Club is?" The man smiled happily when he saw Mu Chiu being so generous and took the crystal core. Only then did he hear Mu Chiu's question. He frowned and thought for a moment, "Daishiandi Entertainment Club?" After a moment, he shook his head, "Brother, we were ordinary people before the end of the world. How can we afford a club? But I do know that there are several places specifically for us awakened people to have fun. A few years ago, the women there were all young white-collar models. Their looks and figures are so beautiful. If we didn't touch each other before the end of the world, there would be no chance of meeting them. But now, have these noble goddesses become the playthings of us awakened ones?" As he said that, the stall owner's face showed a look of reminiscence and yearning. As he swallowed, something seemed to have appeared in his mind. Mu Chiu coughed lightly, and the stall owner regained his composure. He smiled evilly at Mu Chiu and said, "How about it, brother? Do you want me to take you there to have some fun? It's no more interesting than finding some entertainment club." Mu Chiu shook her head and refused without hesitation. In this regard, he was still a bit obsessive, but not all women could catch his eye. After a moment, the young stall owner stared at a handful of white crystal cores in his hand with gleaming eyes, while Mu Chiu's back had already walked far away. "It seems that I need to reserve more white crystal cores next time I hunt." Mu Chiu walked on the street and looked at her empty wallet, feeling helpless. He made a serious mistake. When hunting in the ruins, he only took away the crystal nuclei of B-level and above heretics, but did not even look at the ordinary white crystals. But the most common currency in the safe zone is white crystals, because low-end zombie heretics are easy to deal with. Even stronger survivors can kill a few ordinary zombies with weapons. All white crystals are relatively easy to obtain. Much more convenient. White crystals are produced by ordinary heretics of C-level and D-level. Above the white crystals are blue crystals that are as crystal clear as sapphires. This type of blue crystal core is relatively rare in the safe zone. It can only be found among heretics above level C, and the output is still probabilistic. Recalling that there happened to be a blue crystal in the bag of crystal nuclei that Wei Linger gave to her, this shows that Wei Linger really paid a lot for Mu Chiu. "I have a golden mountain but don't dare to take it out. Now I can feel this feeling." Mu Chiu smiled bitterly. He did have a lot of high-grade crystal cores in his hands now, but once these assets were taken out, it would definitely cause an uproar. If asked about the source of the crystal core, it would be a difficult question to explain. After all, his idea was to remain in human society. If his true strength was exposed, he would inevitably go to the front line to do some dangerous tasks. There are countless hidden dangers in this apocalypse, and he doesn't want to just jump out and become cannon fodder if he has some strength. While Mu Chiu was thinking, there were more pedestrians on both sides of the street, but most of them were survivors and refugees who were in a hurry and had sallow faces. They have to work in exchange for some satiating food. These labors are basically hard work similar to repairing buildings and moving goods, and the food you can get at the end of the day is pitiful. Therefore, many young and middle-aged people are eager to join the guard team in the safe zone. The daily tasks of these guards are to maintain the order of the Yuhai base, transport resources collected by the search team, expel low-level zombie heretics in the surrounding area, etc. But the recruitment quota for guards is only a few thousand people, which is much less than the base's population of tens of thousands, but the treatment is extremely generous. The remuneration of a guard is enough to feed and clothe a family of 3, and the probability of casualties is much smaller than that of a search team exploring the ruins. It is simply a coveted iron rice bowl in the apocalypse. Pedestrians on the street were busy with traffic, but no one was talking or laughing. Instead, they fell into a strange atmosphere of silence. The expressions on everyone's faces were full of melancholy and confusion about the future. Mu Chiu couldn't help but feel a little emotional when she saw this scene. The distinction between the rich and the poor is an unchanging principle no matter what era, and now the standard of measurement has only changed from the previous money and power to the strength of the awakened person's abilities. Just when Mu Chiu lamented the hardships of the world, a survivor passed him by. But just in this moment of rubbing shoulders, the survivor suddenly bumped into his shoulder. Mu Chiu subconsciously threw out her hand and hit the person. The survivor was instantly thrown away. Then it was whipped away at a jaw-dropping speed, and finally hit an abandoned telephone pole aside. Survivors passing by were frightened by this scene, but they heard the one who was thrown away lying on the ground and began to wail violently, and his body paralyzed on the ground was also shaking non-stop. Awakened people hit people. Suddenly, a voice came from somewhere in the crowd, and then similar voices began to come one after another. This person actually violated the regulations of the safe zone and used his status as an awakened person to commit violence in public. Lawless. Where is Yuhai's law enforcement team? Many of the survivors who were watching looked at each other, staring at Mu Chiu with anger, fear, envy, and at the same time a bit of pity. You must know that the Yuhai safe zone is one of the few survivor bases that still maintains order in the entire apocalypse, and it has a law enforcement team dedicated to maintaining order. Among the many laws used to maintain order, the most strictly prohibited is for awakened people to attack ordinary people without supernatural powers. There are even cases where awakened people attack ordinary people, and the awakened people who take action are eventually kicked out of the base. Everyone looked sympathetically at the survivor who fell to the ground, but no one dared to step forward to ask about the situation. At the same time, many people looked in the direction of Mu Chiu to watch the fun. When the law enforcement team arrives, this awakened person will probably suffer a lot. Among the crowd, Ma Kuan, who had a mustache and a slightly wretched appearance, was looking at the scene in front of him with a sinister smile on his face. All of this was planned by him, including the injured survivor and the booing crowd, who were naturally his subordinates. Originally, according to his plan, his younger brother had a dispute with Mu Chiu and caused a conflict. If Mu Chiu surrenders, that cowardly and bully awakened person will be extremely easy to deal with in this apocalyptic world. He has a way to discredit Mu Chiu the next day and make him unable to survive in the entire safe zone. Kind. When the time comes, even that woman Xiao Hanyan won't be able to protect him. But who would have thought that before his men hit Mu Chiu, he slapped his men and sent his men flying several meters away, which really surprised Ma Kuan. Damn, this guy reacts too quickly, doesn't he? That's fine, let's see what this kid will do if things get too big. Ma Kuan smiled evilly and remained calm in the crowd. Mu Chiu, who was surrounded by everyone, had no reaction. She just recalled the subconscious reaction of her body when she was hit, and immediately felt that something was wrong. Looking at the survivor who was groaning on the ground, he saw that he was taking in less air and outgoing more air. Was he being plotted against? Several names quickly emerged in Mu Chiu's mind, but there was only one person he had offended the most since entering Yuhai base, that lizard man Ma Kuan. Not only did he make his brother permanently disabled, but he taught Ma Kuan a lesson at the training ground that time, completely disgracing this veteran awakener. According to Wei Linger, Ma Kuan and his boss Wang Sanping were both determined to seek revenge, but they didn't expect revenge to come so quickly. So Mu Chiu ignored the angry survivors lying on the ground and the eyes of the people around them, and scanned the crowd. Soon, he discovered the unique-looking Ma Kuan among the crowd. Ma Kuan was also stunned when he noticed Mu Chiu's indifferent eyes. However, he quickly reacted and looked at her with a sarcastic look without fear, as if he was watching the fun. Before Mu Chiu could make any move, a burst of noise suddenly came from outside the crowd, and soon a corridor appeared in the circle surrounded by survivors. A group of people wearing dark black uniforms and a blue eagle-shaped badge on their chests walked out. At the head was a man in his 30s or 40s, wearing a hat and with a resolute face. As soon as Fang led the team and walked among the crowd, he took a look at the survivor lying on the ground, then looked at Mu Chiu, then looked around and asked, "What happened?" Ma Kuan walked up to the man at some point and said in the man's ear, "Captain Li, it's like this. This new awakened person is arrogant because a survivor accidentally bumped into him, in front of the public. I will beat this survivor seriously. Do you think this despicable awakened person who is arrogant just because he has superpowers should be detained and taught a lesson?" Ma Kuan's attitude was respectful and he seemed to be very afraid of Captain Li. It seems that this team in black is what everyone calls the law enforcement team. Mu Chiu secretly sensed that the supernatural energy in Captain Li's body had actually reached a level. After Captain Li heard Ma Kuan's exaggerated remarks, he frowned but didn't say anything. He just led the law enforcement team members behind him to check the survivors' injuries. After some investigation, a young man in the team said to the leader, "Captain Li, his waist hit the telephone pole directly, and the bones in his vertebrae were instantly broken. Even if his lower body is cured, he will probably have to spend time in a wheelchair." Already. Hearing these words, all the survivors watching were silent. In this cannibalistic apocalypse, what does it mean to be partially disabled? I can't exercise, I can't even do the most basic physical work, and I'm afraid I need someone to take care of the most basic daily living. Doesn't this directly sentence the man lying on the ground to death? After hearing this, Captain Li glanced at the man on the ground, then walked up to Mu Chiu and said, "No matter what happens between you, come with us first. Come with us. You can give us a reasonable explanation for what happened." The many survivors who were watching shook their heads and sighed when they saw this scene. A good awakened person should have a bright future. After this incident, his reputation in the Jade Sea safe zone was ruined. But what Mu Chiu said next made everyone present stunned. Mu Chiu's lips opened and closed, and 3 words came out of his mouth without any emotion. "I refuse." As soon as these words came out, everyone present was stunned. This is the law enforcement team that is in charge of order in the Yuhai security zone and is committed to its mission. It was established specifically to punish the awakened people who violated the order. In the past, many awakened people relied on their powerful abilities to try to defy the law enforcement team, but in the end they were either kicked out of the Yuhai base or died. This boy is really courageous. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. Ma Kuan, standing next to Captain Li, looked at Mu Chiu Gujing Wubua's eyes and couldn't help but feel a little secretly happy. After offending someone from the law enforcement team, this kid really can't survive in Yuhai. Hearing Mu Chiu's plain words, it seemed as if the person who seriously injured the survivor was not him. Captain Li frowned. This is the most difficult situation during mission execution. The awakened rebel against instructions and violate order. Captain Li looked at Mu Chiu with a slightly unkind look. "Young man, everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Having superpowers is not something you can use to be arrogant and domineering. Now you still have a chance to redeem yourself. Considering that you are a newcomer, the punishment given to you will not be too excessive." Soon, Captain Li stopped talking and stopped persuading. Because he found that Mu Qiu's attention was not on him at all. Mu Qiu looked at Ma Kun behind Captain Li with her deep pupils, and said indifferently, "Is this all your methods? It seems that the lesson I taught you last time was not enough." For a moment, Ma Kun felt like he was being stared at by the bloodthirsty eyes of a ferocious beast, like a thorn in his back. The feeling of being frozen and about to die that day came back again, and his body froze almost subconsciously. What are you going to do? Cold sweat broke out on Ma Kun's forehead, but when he remembered that he was surrounded by people from the law enforcement team, he was also a dignified B-level awakened person. "MD, I'm afraid of a new bee." After coming back to his senses, Ma Kun summoned up his courage again and said with a gloomy smile to Mu Qiu, "Last time I just accidentally got into your way, what happened? You still want to make gestures with me? It seems that if you don't let a newcomer like you see the power of my seniors, you really don't know how high the sky is." After saying this, Ma Kun's eyes turned red and his skin color gradually turned blue and black. This was the rhythm of transforming into a lizard man. Enough. Captain Li's eyes were so sharp that Ma Kun was so frightened that his beard trembled and he returned to his original shape. Then he looked at Mu Qiu indifferently and said to the law enforcement team members beside him, "Take him back for interrogation, and send the wounded person to the medical team." Just as Captain Li was giving instructions, there was another burst of noise from the crowd. As soon as Mu Qiu heard Captain Li's order, her eyes turned cold at first, but then she seemed to sense something, and her eyes were attracted to the crowd. "I saw a long-haired beauty wearing blue jeans and a white coat walking in from the surrounding survivors. When I first saw this woman, she had long, glossy black hair and a plump figure. Even though her figure was covered by a white coat, she could still see it clearly. She was holding a bag in her hand, and she walked suddenly as if she was before the end of the world. Urban beauty. But no one will look down upon this beauty in beautiful clothes, because in this apocalyptic world, there can still be a woman dressed like this, either because she is powerful or she has the support of a powerful awakener behind her." The beautiful woman came to Captain Li, frowned and asked, "Amberly, what's going on?" As soon as Captain Li saw this woman, he hurriedly said, "It turns out to be Dr. Lu. You're here just in time. Come and take a look at this survivor's injuries." When Li Amber saw the beauty in beautiful clothes, he seemed to see a savior and hurriedly explained the situation at the scene briefly. After hearing what Li Anbai said, Dr. Lu first glanced at Mu Qiu, and then quickly rushed to the survivor who collapsed on the ground. He was seen leaning over and bending his knees, and his curvy body curves were clearly visible. The familiar figure took out a pair of white gloves from the satchel around his waist, and then began to examine the injured person with a shattered lumbar spine. While Dr. Lu was inspecting it, the survivors around him seemed to be alive and began to talk one after another. "It's concubine Lu Qing, Dr. Lu. She is the living bodhisattva of our Yuhai safe zone." Dr. Lu was a doctoral student at Yuhai Medical University before the end of the world. He has always been a goddess-level figure. Great, with Dr. Lu here, the injured person should have no problem surviving. Amid the cheers of the crowd, concubine Lu Qing, who was wearing a white coat and was regarded as a goddess by many survivors, did not dare to slack off at all. Fine cold sweat appeared on the snow-white goose neck. Lu Qingfei looked at the waist of the injured person, frowned slightly, and then stretched out her white arms. I saw a green bandage appear on the jade hand, and then it turned into a bandage glowing with emerald green light. The green bandage floated and rotated in the air, and under the command of Lu Qingfei's wave of arms, it was directly wrapped around the survivor's lumbar spine. Dots of fluorescence suddenly began to spread around the waist as the bandage was wrapped at a speed visible to the naked eye. The survivor also let out a few faint audible moans. But anyone with a discerning eye can see that this man's condition is much better than when he fell to the ground just now. Soon, dozens of breaths passed, and the man's condition gradually stabilized, and the emerald green bandage controlled by Lu Qingfei also dissipated in the air. Concubine Lu Qing looked pale, and even beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. She stood up and said to Li Amber. His condition has stabilized for the time being, but he still needs to rest for a while. I will diagnose and treat him again in a week, which should ensure that he will not have problems walking in the future. Great, Dr. Lu is indeed as rumored, treating both the awakened and us ordinary people equally. She is so beautiful and has such a kind heart. I wonder which kid will be so lucky to marry Dr. Lu in the future. Don't have such wishful thinking. Dr. Lu already has a fiancée, but she just got separated from her husband after the apocalypse. The survivors who were watching were as if their chests had been exploded, as if the man lying on the ground was their relative, and they all looked at Lu Qingfei with admiration. Facing the admiring looks of everyone, Lu Qingfei didn't care and walked straight to Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu was also observing concubine Lu Qing at this time. Well, you have a charming face, elegant temperament, and proud figure. You must at least have, Ahem. What really surprised him was that the supernatural energy in this woman's body actually reached a level. This was the first time he had seen a female awakener with such high supernatural energy in Yuhai. This woman's identity is not simple. While Mu Qiu was thinking about it, concubine Lu Qing frowned and suddenly pointed at Mu Qiu and asked, "Do you think this is interesting?" Mu Qiu was startled. But concubine Lu Qing's red lips parted slightly, and her tone of voice was extremely cold. As an awakened person with superpowers, not to mention praying for the people, eradicating heretics, and becoming a world-class hero, you must at least be worthy of your skills and your own conscience. You have great abilities, but you use them to bully humans like you, just because they are weaker than you. I have seen too many people like you in this last world, who are selfish and insensitive. He takes pride in bullying the weak, but he is afraid to avoid danger and runs faster than anyone else. People like you don't deserve to have this kind of superpower. Concubine Lu Qing's sonorous and powerful screams resounded throughout the audience. For a moment, everyone fell silent. Good. Well said. The surrounding survivors were instantly aroused by these preaching words, and their expressions were completely different from the numbness just now. Instead, they all had indignant expressions on their faces, and they all became angry. This kind of person doesn't deserve to have superpowers at all. Get out of the Yuhai safe zone. You don't deserve to be here. First a few people took the lead, and then the crowd's emotions were instantly ignited. As if to vent the resentment that had been suppressed and accumulated during this period, the overwhelming curses hit Mu Qiu like thunder on the ground. When Ma Kuan saw this scene, although it was somewhat different from his original plan, the effect was undoubtedly better. I didn't expect concubine Lu Qing to come at this time, but she just happened to help me. With the help of this bitch, Mu Qiu's reputation is completely ruined. Ma Kuan wished that Mu Qiu's reputation would be discredited, so that it would be easier to deal with him. Thinking of this, Ma Kuan looked at Mu Qiu with a sarcastic smile on his face. Countless abuses and accusations came like a wave. Ordinary people might defend themselves or go crazy when being criticized, but Mu Qiu, who was in the whirlpool, seemed particularly calm. The power of the tiger talisman brought him absolute neutrality and peace. He. Suddenly, the corners of Mu Qiu's mouth raised into a strange smile. The sound is not loud, but it can be heard clearly by everyone present. With countless hostile eyes staring at him and his ears filled with ridicules and curses, how could this man still laugh? Could it be that you are really crazy? Everyone was puzzled. Even concubine Lu Qing, who was the first to bear the brunt, frowned slightly, puzzled by what he meant. The sounds around him gradually dropped, but Mu Qiu's laughter became more intense. In the end, the whole place was filled with Mu Qiu's slightly sarcastic laughter. Mu Qiu looked at concubine Lu Qing with a hint of amusement in her eyes. This kind of gaze made concubine Lu Qing feel very uncomfortable, and she only felt a chill in her bones. She had a vague premonition. Mu Qiu's laughter stopped. You're right, you have power. You can indeed do whatever you want. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in Mu Chio's eyes. Mu Chio waved his right arm, and an icy blue bolt shot out from his palm. This magnificent icy blue bolt struck through the air like thunder, directly hitting the injured survivor who fell to the ground. In an instant, the man fell into an ice cave, his whole body was frozen by the ice for an instant, and there was still an inexplicable look of horror on his face. From Mu Chio shooting out an ice blue beam, to the survivors being frozen into ice blocks, the whole process happened in the blink of an eye, and no one present could react. What are you up to? The bad premonition began to grow in her heart. Lu Qingfei stared at Mu Chio closely, with an uneasy and panicked look in her eyes for the first time. A smile appeared at the corner of Mu Chio's mouth, and her messy hair fluttered in the wind, covering his deep eyes. The next second, Mu Chio's open right palm suddenly closed. Crack! Everyone turned around when they heard the sound, and saw that the ice block that froze the survivors seemed to have been crushed by some invisible force, and was covered with cracks. Suddenly, like a mirror shattering, the huge human-shaped ice cube broke instantly. There are still broken limbs of human beings in the ice, and scarlet blood stains spread all over the ground as the ice breaks. The survivor's head was still sealed in a block of ice alone, with a look of horror on his face, and his wide-open pupils filled with fear and horror. The connection between the neck and the head was still gurgling with blood. Now, who else is going to accuse me? Mu Chio looked indifferent and glanced at the surrounding survivors. Most of the survivors still had a look of horror on their faces, and they had not yet recovered from the scene just now. The few survivors who had seen big scenes in the apocalypse also showed fear when they saw Mu Chio's horrific killing methods. They all avoided looking and did not dare to say another word. Court death. There was a sound breaking through the air, and Li Anbai arrived in front of Mu Chio in just a few moves, as if there was wind at his feet. Immediately, Li Anbai turned sideways, and the rough human palm instantly turned into the sharp claws of an eagle, piercing Mu Chio's eyes fiercely. Mu Chio snorted coldly, and also stretched out her palms into claws. The moment Li Amber's eagle claws stabbed his eyes, he clamped Li Amber's wrist tightly like a soldering iron. Before Li Amber could recover from Mu Chio's quick counterattack, he immediately felt numbness and coldness in his restrained wrist. He looked down suddenly and saw that a piece of ice had condensed on his wrist, and it quickly hit his wrist. Li Amber blurted out, "Elemental Awakener." Before Li Amber could say anything else, the members of the law enforcement team behind him saw that the captain was in danger. They all took out the pistols at their waists, pulled the triggers, and fired bullets at Mu Chio. Seeing this scene, Mu Chio's eyes were slightly cold, and then she clamped Li Amber's eagle claw with her right hand. At the same time, he stretched out his left hand, and a light blue mist emerged from his palm like frost, and in an instant, it solidified into an ice wall as high as one person in front of Mu Chio. The hail of bullets hit the ice wall as if they were hitting iron sheets, causing sparks to shoot out in an instant. Occasionally, a few bullets would punch a finger-thick hole in the ice wall, but hundreds of bullets could not penetrate the ice wall, which was as tall as a person. Weird, monster. Seeing the incredible scene in front of them, one of the survivors finally couldn't help but trembled. The surrounding survivors were all frightened by Mu Chio's methods, and they all retreated in fear, fearing that Mu Chio would go crazy and hurt them. At this moment, Mu Chio's right palm was still clamping Li Amber's eagle claws, and the cold frost was still spreading along Li Amber's eagle claws towards her arms. Suddenly, Mu Chio's figure flashed and she was in front of concubine Lu Qing in an instant. Mu Chio's eyes met Lu Qingfei's, and she could clearly see the shock and panic in her eyes. Mu Chio suddenly smiled and said, "I think it's very interesting, what about you? You can hold on to the foolish Holy Mother heart in your heart, but don't try to inflict it on other people. The law of this world is that the weak eat the strong. If you have power, you can do whatever you want, just like." As he spoke, Mu Chio paused. So. Mu Qiu spread out her right hand, and a blue ice pick suddenly condensed in her palm. Mu Qiu raised her arms high. The next second, the ice cone was thrown away like a thunder missile. Everyone could only vaguely see an icy blue edge suddenly flashing through the air, hitting Ma Kuen's direction. In the blink of an eye, Ma Kuen could not react. He could only watch helplessly as a blue light not far away continued to enlarge in his pupils. Not good. He didn't react until an ice pick as long as an arm was already close to Ma Kuen's head. He tilted his body and tried to get out of the way. At the same time, he subconsciously transformed into the form of a lizard man, with his skin wrinkled and showing a strange bluish-purple color. This was already his strongest form, but he still couldn't escape this swift blow. Ma Kuen narrowly avoided the critical point, but his shoulder was still pierced by the sharp ice pick. There was just a click sound, and the ice pick shattered as it penetrated Ma Kuen's shoulder blade. At the same time, he saw blood flying in the air. Ma Kuen was punched through the shoulder. He couldn't bear the severe pain and fell to his knees, covering his shoulder and howling. Mu Qiu glanced at Ma Kuen, but secretly shook her head in her heart. His ice elemental power is still at the B-level level of the zombie heretic he absorbed. The reason why he was able to suppress Li Anbai, who was a B-level or even A-level awakener, was all because of his own powerful strength and rich combat experience when he transformed into the Fire Lord. But B-level powers alone are still too weak after all. No matter how many skills he has, he still seems a little powerless when facing high-level awakened ones. It seems that we need to find a way to increase the level of ice powers. Mu Qiu thought to herself, then turned to look at concubine Lu Qing. Even though she was wearing a white coat, she still couldn't hide her proud figure. Her long hair was black and shiny, her face was beautiful and elegant, and she had an aura of elegance all over her body. See? It's a simple thing. I have power, so I can play with life as I please. This is the biggest truth in this apocalypse. If you don't even understand such a simple truth, I really don't know how you are alive today. The plain words were full of sarcasm, piercing concubine Lu Qing's heart like a sharp needle. A trace of anger appeared on Lu Qingfei's pale face, and she shouted, "I have nothing to say to a cold-blooded and ruthless human like you." Human. Mu Qiu narrowed her eyes slightly, still smiling. He stopped being that a long time ago. Then Mu Qiu raised her head and glanced at Ma Kuen, who was kneeling and wailing, covering his shoulders. He didn't even bother to say anything to such a small-time minion. If Mu Qiu hadn't considered his sensitive status as an awakened person and killed him rashly, which might cause dissatisfaction in the base, he would have slapped Ma Kuen to death. Mu Qiu looked around again at the survivors watching the excitement. At this moment, some people had been scared away by Mu Qiu's bloody methods, and some of the people who stayed behind were frightened by Mu Qiu's slightly smiling face and retreated one after another. It was obvious that he had a handsome face with a spring breeze-like smile, but in the eyes of everyone, he looked like an evil ghost crawling out of the abyss of hell, and they were afraid to avoid him. "My great holy mother, farewell." Mu Qiu's voice was mixed with a hearty smile, and she turned her hands behind her back and walked towards the distance. And behind him was the body of the survivor that had been shattered into pieces by the ice. Lu Qingfei's pretty face turned pale with anger, but there was nothing she could do about Mu Qiu. Her powers are therapeutic and not offensive. The members of the law enforcement team next to him did not intend to let him go so easily. They were about to step forward to stop him, but were stopped by a pair of eagle claws. "It's Amber Li. Captain, him." Some members of the law enforcement team who couldn't stand Mu Qiu's arrogance were confused about Li Amber's behavior. He has never seen such an arrogant awakened person in front of the law enforcement team. Li Anbai looked at Mu Qiu's back intently and said coldly, "This kid is not simple. Report it to the superiors first." An awakened person of the elemental system is still of great value to the base in training. The premise is, that he can obey the command of the base. Li Amber sighed softly, looked at the pile of corpses under the telephone pole not far away, and felt a headache again. He said to the members of the law enforcement team beside him, "Go and clean up the body." Incidents of elemental awakeners openly killing people quickly swept through the entire Jade Sea safe zone like a wave. Under the fermentation of caring people, the incident made a group of ordinary survivors panic and uneasy. They didn't know how long the order in the safe zone could be maintained. Some people even scolded the law enforcement team for their inaction, publicly shielding him because he was a rare elemental awakener. Just as rumors were swirling outside, Xiao Hanyan also received news. The man wearing white clothes and glasses pushed open the door and said to Xiao Hanyan in the office. It has been found out that the survivor killed by Mu Qiu was a gangster before his death, but he was Ma Kuan's subordinate. This person often uses violent means to collect property from surrounding survivors. The law enforcement team has taught him many times, but because he has Ma Kuan behind him, he still refuses to accept discipline. A map was spread out on the table in front of Xiao Hanyan. Listening to the bespectacled man's report, Xiao Hanyan looked at the marks on the map. Hearing this, Xiao Hanyan raised his head and said, "So, what happened this time? Was Ma Kuan secretly doing something?" The man in glasses nodded. It is reported that it was Mu Qiu who defeated Ma Kuan in the training ground that day. Xiao Hanyan's frosty face finally showed a touch of emotion. At this point, you are still provoking internal strife for your own selfish desires. Do you really want to completely destroy human society and get along with those zombies and beasts? Major, do you want someone from the law enforcement team to teach Ma Kuan a lesson? The man with glasses suggested. Xiao Hanyan shook his head. Wang Depeng is coming back soon. If his people are touched at this juncture, there is no telling how he will react. Besides, Mu Qiu did go too far this time, defying the order in the base and openly killing people. This is a fact that cannot be ignored. Xiao Hanyan pondered for a moment and immediately issued the order with her resolute attitude. Let the law enforcement team strengthen patrols. We will never allow a second incident of awakened people to hurt people. We must do our best to block the spread of this news. Ma Kuan sent someone to remind him that although the base is short of manpower, there is definitely no shortage of B-level awakeners. There was no expression on Xiao Hanyan's cold face, only a cold light seemed to flash through his eyes. Whether he wants to continue living his good life in the base or survive in the apocalypse outside, it's his own choice. And this Mu Qiu. Since he is under Linger, let Linger go over and make him be more honest. In addition, more manpower will be sent to monitor him. If he does anything that violates order again, even if he is an elemental awakener with great potential, there will be no place for him in the Jade Sea base. Xiao Hanyan issued a series of orders decisively and sharply, which was her usual style. The man with glasses took it for granted and nodded, yes. At the same time, in an office in a high-rise building in the center of Yuhai Safety Zone. A middle-aged man with a plump body and a rich face sat on a mink chair and listened to the rumors brought by his subordinates. This person is none other than another leader in Yuhai base, Zhang Qingwei, who has the ability to detect treasures. After hearing what Mu Qiu did, Zhang Qingwei was not angry. Instead, he laughed and said, "It seems that this little brother is still very energetic. It's interesting, but I don't know how Wang Depeng will react when he comes back and finds out that his subordinates have been bullied. After all, he is a destructive level elemental awakener." At this time, one of his subordinates handed a map in his hand to Zhang Qing. "Chairman, this is the map sent by Major Xiao. The next search team is about to set off. Please mark the location of the resources." Zhang Qingwei did not speak, but closed his eyes after taking the map. He suddenly raised his arm, stretched out his index finger and dipped it in the ink on the side. Suddenly a golden halo appeared on Zhang Qingwei's broad forehead. An invisible energy began to flow around Zhang Qingwei's plump body. The men beside him were amazed. This is Zhang Qingwei's powerful ability that has established a foundation in the apocalypse. Super Power System, Treasure Hunt. The true power of this power lies not in its destructive power, but in its amazing supporting abilities. Zhang Qingwei can rely on his treasure hunting ability to quickly identify the location of the resource he is looking for, and can even be precise to the specific coordinates on the map. What's even more terrifying is that this ability can not only locate the location of food and treasures, but can even locate the coordinates of some zombies and heretical monsters. Of course, this ability will consume more as the level of the target is higher. At least powerful existences like S-Class are not something Zhang Qingwei can perceive at will. With this superpower, Zhang Qingwei collected countless resources at the beginning of the apocalypse, and his people also used his superpower to seek good fortune and avoid disaster many times, and turn danger into safety. Zhang Qingwei's eyes were closed, but he seemed to see something. His ink-stained fingers were pulled by an invisible energy, and ink marks were lit at several locations on the map. A few minutes later, Zhang Qingwei paused while writing on the map. Zhang Qingwei opened his eyes suddenly, and then retracted his fingers from the map. Handing the map to his subordinates, Zhang Qingwei said, "The locations of several A-level heretics discovered so far have been marked on the map, but we do not rule out the possibility that these monsters have been active in recent days." The subordinate nodded and suggested, "Due to the matter of the elemental awakeners, the situation in the base is a bit chaotic. Do we need our people to stabilize the situation?" Zhang Qingwei waved his hand. "Xiao Hanyan is enough to settle this matter. I don't want to get involved in anything anymore, so let's let Xiao Yada fight with that lunatic Wang Depeng." After receiving the order, his subordinate said, "Chairman, we have recently found several surviving female students around Yuhai University. Look. Ahem." Zhang Qingwei suddenly coughed twice, but his face was still serious. "Send them to me tonight, and I will assign them jobs in the base." Mu Qiu was awakened by a rapid knock on the door. The room where Mu Qiu lives is located on the second floor of the villa. It can wake up Mu Qiu on the first floor, which shows how powerful the knocker is. Rubbing her groggy eyes, Mu Qiu slowly opened the door. What came into view was Wei Linger's delicate figure with her hands on her hips, and a scowl on her pretty face. It looked so much like a kitten with fried hair. Mu Qiu was stunned. If he remembered correctly, the search team's mission should be tomorrow, right? When Wei Linger saw Mu Qiu opening the door, she immediately rushed in angrily, revealing a pair of sharp little tiger teeth, pointing at Mu Qiu and saying, "Do you know how much trouble you have caused?" After saying that, she noticed that Mu Qiu was sleepy and looked like she hadn't woken up. "You still have time to sleep here?" Mu Qiu was confused, took a breath and asked, "What happened?" In fact, he already had a guess in his mind. As expected, Wei Linger said angrily, "The fact that you openly killed a survivor today caused an uproar among the people in the safe zone. How long has it been since the awakened ones dared to openly violate the order in the base? There are even many awakened people who are proposing to drive you out of the base. What happened today really gave Sister Han Yen a headache. Do you know how much effort it takes to suppress this matter? As your captain, I also have a list of responsibilities that I cannot shirk. Well, Mu Qiu, I brought you into Jade Sea, and this is how you repay me." Being scolded by the eldest lady, Mu Qiu was stunned. "Are you here to ask questions?" The next moment, the eldest lady pursed her lips and said angrily, "If you want to kill someone, at least find a secluded place and kill him quietly. You killed people openly and openly. Isn't this just a matter of fact?" Mu Qiu laughed. It turned out that Wei Linger was angry about this. Wei Linger flashed her fangs and gritted her teeth, as if she hated iron for not becoming steel. "Okay now, Sister Qingfei has specifically reported your situation to the superiors. You dare to provoke Sister Qingfei, you really don't know how to live or die. Concubine Lu Qing. Why does it feel like this Madonna has a high status?" The people in the law enforcement team are very respectful to her, and even Wei Linger knows her. Seeing the confusion in Mu Qiu's eyes, Wei Linger explained. Sister Qingfei is the captain of the medical team in the base. She was a doctoral student in medicine at Yuhai University before the end of the world. After the apocalypse broke out, she awakened her healing powers. Sister Qingfei is kind-hearted, and she will also use her own money to help those survivors who are in need. In the apocalypse, I have rescued countless injured awakened people and innocent survivors. I am regarded by many people in the base as an angelic and bodhisattva-like figure. Really? That's really a great virgin. The corners of Mu Qiu's lips curled up, remembering concubine Lu Qing's righteous words yesterday and her overflowing sympathy, she couldn't help but laugh. It seems that the establishment of this Yuhai base is quite complete. Mu Qiu said. That's right. As soon as Wei Linger heard Mu Qiu praise the Yuhai safe zone, she couldn't help but continue to say. There are 3 teams established in the Yuhai base, which are organized according to their functions into the search team, the law enforcement team and the final medical team. The members of the search team are us awakened ones who have certain destructive power and self-protection and investigation capabilities. Their main job is to search the ruins and rescue survivors in the city. The main task of the law enforcement team is to supervise the order in the safe zone, which includes the recruited ordinary guards and the special law enforcement team specifically targeting the awakened. Mu Qiu thought of the A-level awakened person Li Amber that she met that day. He must be a member of the special law enforcement team that specializes in dealing with awakened people. The search team and law enforcement team are responsible for the duties inside and outside the base, and they all exist to maintain the order of the Yuhai safety zone. As for the final medical team, there are only a few dozen members in the entire medical team, but without exception, they are all rare therapeutic awakeners. Don't underestimate this medical team, which only has a few dozen people. After the outbreak of the apocalypse, there are countless new viral diseases that have spawned. Ordinary doctors are completely helpless, and with the lack of drugs, it is even more difficult to diagnose and treat. In the end, all kinds of strange diseases must be treated by the awakened people of the medical team without exception. Even if our search team is injured when going out, only awakened people with healing abilities can relieve the injuries as soon as possible and save the lives of the awakened people. Speaking of this, Wei Linger looked at Mu Qiu with sympathetic eyes, and then sighed. And Sister Qingfei is an important member of the Yuhai medical team. If you offend Sister Qingfei, you will be in trouble. If you are injured or infected with any virus in the future, I am afraid that no one in the entire medical team will come to treat you. Besides, there are many suitors for Sister Qingfei in the search team. You provoked Sister Qingfei so much yesterday. Be careful that someone might stumble upon you when you go out. Wei Linger's words were very detailed and full of concern. Obviously her main purpose of coming here today is not only to warn Mu Qiu on behalf of her superiors, but also to give Mu Qiu a reminder. Mu Qiu felt funny. This girl was obviously worried about herself, but she didn't dare to say it out loud, so she could only remind herself to be careful by asking for help. Then I really have to thank you for your teaching, Captain of the Guard. Mu Qiu said with a smile, it seems that I am causing trouble for you this time. Wei Linger pursed her lips, with an arrogant little expression, and hummed softly, it's good that you know. Please be nicer to Sister Qingfei when you see me in the future, do you hear me? Mu Qiu nodded and said yes with a smile. Since Wei Linger said so, he was not an ignorant person. And that Ma Kuan, the people above have also warned him. If he troubles you again, just tell me and see if I don't beat him all over the ground. As she spoke, Wei Linger did not forget to wave her white-pink fists with a fierce look. As for you, just be more at ease with me. Tomorrow the search team will go out of the city to perform a mission. If you behave better, consider it as a reward for me. While Mu Qiu and Wei Linger were talking, they were in a bar in a certain neighborhood of Yuhai safe zone. There are lights and colorful decorations, a noisy environment, a surging flow of people, noisy drum beats, and enchanting dancing figures everywhere in this underground bar. What is surprising is that since the outbreak of the apocalypse, there have been very few places where such human groups can move. Even the Yuhai safety zone has only restored some of the important building facilities used for medical research. The background behind this bar being able to restore power supply facilities so quickly can be imagined. In a luxurious box in the bar, a slightly fat young man with short hair was lying on a high-end sofa, holding a wine bottle in his hand and holding two scantily clad and pretty girls in his arms. Standing directly in front was a man with a mustache and a wretched face. Ma Kuan clutched his still aching shoulder and complained to the fat man in front of him. "Brother Hao, it's obvious that Mu Chiu doesn't take our boss Wang seriously. I even mentioned the boss's name and he still dares to be so arrogant. A newcomer almost peed on our heads. You have to avenge me." Ma Kuan was crying, looking like he was suffering, and he cried out everything that happened to the man in front of him who looked younger than him. Even so, Ma Kuan did not feel humiliated because this man had extraordinary influence even in the entire Yuhai safe zone. This person is one of the 3 destruction-level guardians of the Yuhai safe zone, Wang Depeng's younger brother Wang Hao. Wang Hao himself is not very powerful, but the most fortunate thing is that he has a powerful and crazy brother. After the outbreak of the apocalypse, Wang Depeng, who was originally a gangster, turned out to be a gangster. With his powerful superpowers and ruthless personality, he quickly became a gangster. A post-apocalyptic hero who dominates one side. With the support of such a prosperous giant brother, Wang Hao also had a group of younger brothers, and he was still prospering in this cruel apocalypse. Listening to Ma Kuan's cry, Wang Hao didn't care. He drank the last bottle of liquor in his hand and threw it aside. Then he began to move his hands up and down the 2 beauties in his arms, and the girl in his arms also let out a coquettish giggle. After playing around for a while, Wang Hao lay down on the sofa again, picked up a cigarette and started smoking, and said casually, "Xiao Hanyan has sent someone to warn you, saying that if you dare to be dishonest again, you will be told to get out of the base." Mu Chiu's appearance appeared in Ma Kuan's mind, and he said harshly, "Then let's just let this matter go." "Of course not." Wang Hao slapped the table, dusted off the cigarette ashes on his hands, and said sternly, "Anyone who dares to touch our people is provoking my brother's face. If this allows him to live in peace, then where is the majesty of our Shenglong society?" Shenglonghui is the organization founded by Wang Depeng before it was merged into Yuhai base. This organization is so powerful that before the Yuhai base was established, just mentioning the name could scare many awakened people in the Yuhai realm into fear and submission. Ma Kuan had already anticipated Wang Hao's answer, and his crying just now was just for fun. During the Shenglong Hui, Wang Depeng's reputation was unparalleled. Who dared to provoke his men? Now let alone provocation, although he is just an ordinary gangster among peripheral members, he is still closely related to the Shenglong society. Mu Chiu killed her directly in front of everyone. Wasn't this a slap in the face of Shenglonghui in public? Ma Kuan rubbed his shoulder, which was still aching slightly, but there was a sinister smile in his heart. Mu Chiu is not far from death if she dares to stroke Wang Depeng's tiger beard. In fact, yesterday he was indeed penetrated by Mu Chiu's ice pick through his shoulder blade, but what was the superpower he awakened? The biggest feature of Lizard's ability is that he can regenerate his broken limbs. Although this is far from possible at his current level, most of yesterday's injuries have healed in less than a day. Now he only thinks about how to take revenge on Mu Chiu. This Mu Chiu is an awakener of the elemental system. Ma Kuan reminded him deliberately. Wang Hao spat, with a look of disdain on his face. "What about the awakened ones of the elemental system? If you dare to provoke me, Shenglonghui, I will still destroy his body." Then he snorted coldly and said, "This time the search team goes out to explore the ruins, Wei Linger's team will also go out. I will arrange manpower for you then. If you find a chance, you can do the job for the one named Mu Chiu." remember to keep your hands and feet clean. Ma Kuan beamed with joy. This was what he had been waiting for. You know, when the search team goes out on an exploration mission, it is normal for a few people to die. By the way, if you have a chance, remember to fix that little girl Wei Linger for me. Wang Hao suddenly revealed a lustful look in his eyes, licked his lips and said, I've been eyeing that little girl for a long time, Zhen, that little figure looks really alluring. As he spoke, his arms hugged the two beauties in his arms tighter, making the beauties around him squeal. Ma Kuan was sarcastic in his heart, but he couldn't show it on his face, so he quickly nodded in agreement. A cold light flashed across Ma Kuan's eyes as he walked out of the bar and walked in the alley. Mu Qiu, I will definitely kill you without a burial place this time. As night fell, Mu Qiu was sitting on the Simmons mattress under the chandelier of the second-story villa, holding an ice-blue crystal core in each hand. The bright chandelier reflected Mu Qiu's handsome face. After the Yuhai base was established, the top management quickly restored the power supply system to some important areas, and the high-end villa area where Mu Qiu was located was also within this line. Mu Qiu's eyes were closed, and there was a deep blue crystal core in each palm. The crystal core is exuding a magnificent light blue halo, and ripples bloom under the reflection of the light. The halo lingered around Mu Qiu's hand at first, but then it seemed to be attracted by something, and gradually merged into Mu Qiu's body. As these halos merged into Mu Qiu's body, the temperature of Mu Qiu's body surface also gradually dropped, causing the temperature of the air to drop a lot. The entire villa seemed to have been invaded by cold air. There was already a strange air conditioning blowing before the air conditioner was turned on. The water vapor in the room began to condense into transparent water droplets, dripping down the walls. At a certain moment, Mu Qiu suddenly opened her eyes, and saw an icy blue light flashing through her deep pupils. Sure enough, the energy in the crystal core is still far less satisfying than swallowing it directly. Mu Qiu looked at the dull pile of crystal nuclei beside the bed that had been absorbed completely, and sighed softly. Only after absorbing all the energy in these crystal nuclei can he upgrade his ice powers to the peak of B level. After all, the ice zombies he absorbed were only at the early B level. If there is another attack like yesterday, the ice pick will penetrate not only Ma Kuan's shoulder blades, but even half of his body will be frozen the moment it comes into contact with the ice pick, and will be shattered by the impact of the ice pick in an instant. Mu Qiu has not yet broken through the bottleneck by absorbing so many crystal nuclei. You can imagine how difficult it is for ordinary awakened people to advance. Mu Qiu felt a little helpless in her heart. Logically speaking, the fire demon had devoured 8,000 human awakeners and heretics over the years, not to mention 10,000, making it the most terrifying heresy in this apocalyptic world. But the only things that were really useful to him were the fire ability and the ice ability of the zombie heretic that Balrog absorbed when he was reborn. I have to say that Balrog's luck is really bad. He only swallowed 2 elemental superpowers. It's time to explore the ruins of the city with the team tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to it. Mu Qiu stood up and stretched, looking at the full moon through the large floor-to-ceiling windows on the second floor. A joint hunt between a zombie king and humans. Early the next morning, Mu Qiu arrived at an abandoned coffee shop in the west of the city as agreed with Wei Linger. The entire coffee shop was so empty that Mu Qiu could even keenly notice that the flower bed at the door was covered with dust. Mu Qiu calculated the time, it should be just in time, and then pushed the door open and entered. When I walked into the coffee shop, I saw that there was no one around, except for a few people sitting at a square table in front of the lonely counter of the coffee shop. Mu Qiu observed the appearance of several people and found that this team was really full of talents. Sitting on the far right side of the table is a middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance and wearing work clothes. He is the kind of man who would not even glance at him when walking on the street. Sitting next to the middle-aged man was a young fat man who seemed to be in his 20s. He was eating melon seeds and chatting with the people around him, with a smile on his face. Sitting on the other side was a little girl who looked like a junior high school student. She looked about 13 or 14 years old. She had a pretty appearance. She was wearing a floral dress and her hair was tied back in a pair of ponytails. She looked cute and well-behaved. Like the girl next door. There is a little squirrel lying on the girl's shoulder, sleeping soundly on the girl's shoulder as if it is not afraid of strangers. But when Mu Chiu looked at the person sitting next to the girl, she was slightly stunned, with surprise in her eyes. Why is this person here? Because several people were chatting and had their backs to Mu Chiu, they obviously did not notice Mu Chiu's arrival immediately. Seeing a familiar face, Mu Chiu couldn't help but feel slightly startled. Why is she here? This familiar face is none other than Lu Qingfei, a member of the medical team who was mocked by Mu Chiu as the Madonna yesterday. Hey, Mu Chiu, you're here. Just when Mu Chiu was confused, a sweet voice like a silver bell suddenly came from the front. Mu Chiu turned around and saw Wei Linger holding a spoon at the counter in front of her, preparing a cup of coffee on the counter. Hearing Wei Linger's voice, the people who were talking stopped talking and looked at Mu Chiu who had just entered. The middle-aged man and the fat man looked at Mu Chiu with curious eyes. Apparently they also knew something about Mu Chiu, who had caused quite a stir in the base in recent days. The little girl glanced at Mu Chiu and then hurriedly lowered her head. As for concubine Lu Qing, she glanced at Mu Chiu, frowned, and then stopped talking. Huh, you've made us wait for so long for a newcomer, you're really proud of yourself. A slightly sarcastic voice came, and Mu Chiu turned around to see a short-haired man wearing a vest leaning against the corner, holding a coffee cup in his hand and looking at Mu Chiu with a somewhat unhappy expression. Mu Chiu frowned slightly. For some reason, he sensed an undisguised malice from this man. If I remember correctly, it's not the agreed gathering time yet, right? Mu Chiu retorted, and a flash of anger suddenly flashed in the short-haired man's eyes, and he stared at Mu Chiu with a pair of tiger eyes. Mu Chiu naturally showed no fear and looked at him calmly. This must be little brother Mu Chiu who is famous in Yuhai these days. Just as the atmosphere solidified, the middle-aged man sitting at the table stood up, walked over to Mu Chiu and said with a simple and honest smile. A rare elemental power, even at my age I am envious of it. Mu Chiu turned her gaze over, smiled calmly and said, No, I'm just lucky. At this time, Wei Linger also came over with a cup of coffee. First he glared at the short-haired man leaning against the corner, then handed the coffee in his hand to Mu Chiu and whispered in his ear. This man's name is Song Songhua. He is an awakener of the mutation system. Sister Qingfei saved his life before. He is also one of Sister Qingfei's suitors. Mu Chiu suddenly realized that no wonder this short-haired man was targeting her so much. It turned out that he was standing up for Lu Qingfei, the Holy Mother. Then Wei Linger also began to introduce the team members to Mu Chiu. This middle-aged uncle is called Chen Weiguo. His ability is like a barrier and he is a reliable defensive player in our team. Where? Chen Weiguo touched the back of his head honestly, wiped his hands with his pants and said. Don't listen to Linger's nonsense. I was a migrant worker before the end of the world. I joined the search team just to make a living in this shitty end of the world. Mu Chiu shook hands with him, smiled and nodded. Chen Weiguo secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that this newcomer was not as difficult to get along with as rumored. Wei Linger pointed at the fat young man sitting on the sofa and said. His name is Zhu Feng, you can just call him Fatty. His ability is. The fat man suddenly grinned and stood up from the sofa. Then his body moved and blurred into an afterimage. After a few steps, he came to Mu Chiu and answered. My superpower is super high-speed movement. How about it, brother? It's not bad, right? It's pretty good. Mu Chiu did not expect that this man was still a flexible fat man, and his slightly fat body did not slow down his wind-like speed at all. After a brief induction, this fat man is also a B-level awakener. With his speed and ability, he should be responsible for investigation work in the team. Of course, this speed is still far behind his rabbit charm. Mu Qiu looked at the girl with two ponytails, her head lowered, huddled in concubine Lu Qing's arms. The girl seemed to be aware of Mu Qiu's gaze. She raised her head and lowered her head hurriedly. Wei Ling'er stepped forward and rubbed the girl's head, smiling sweetly. This is Sister Su Wen. She is relatively introverted to strangers. You can just get to know her better in the future. Hello, hello. Hearing Wei Ling'er introducing herself, Su Wen blushed and said hello to Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu naturally had no ill intentions toward such a cute little sister and responded with a smile. Wei Ling'er said to Mu Qiu, "Don't underestimate Sister Su Wen, her ability is said to be able to listen to the voices of all things." After hearing this, Su Wen hurriedly waved her little hands, and was so anxious that she shook the squirrel off her shoulders. No, now we can only communicate with some sane animals. Wei Ling'er pinched Su Wen's fair and slightly voluptuous face, and said with a smile, "Even so, Xiao Wenwen is still an important source of information for our team." Relying on Sister Wenwen's information, we avoided a lot of trouble during the execution of the mission. Mu Qiu nodded. If this little sister really has the ability to communicate with all things, then she is indeed a powerful superpower with great potential for growth. Next, Wei Ling'er looked at concubine Lu Qing, who was also sitting beside her. She didn't know how to introduce him for a moment. After all, the two of them had a holiday not long ago. Before Wei Ling'er could speak, concubine Lu Qing stood up first. Although she was a little embarrassed, she still smiled at Mu Qiu and said, "Ling'er has already told me what happened that day. It's true that I misunderstood you. I apologize to you for my rashness that day, but I still cannot agree with your actions. After all, it is a human life no matter what, and his life and death should not be decided so easily." Mu Qiu looked around concubine Lu Qing. Today she was still wearing dark blue denim trousers, but the white coat was missing from her upper body, which vividly outlined her perfect and proud figure. Her beautiful face, with just a touch of pink and white, is already a rare beauty in the apocalypse. Her long hair is tied into a single ponytail at the back of her head, adding a sense of vitality on the basis of maturity and elegance. After hearing concubine Lu Qing's words, Mu Qiu first turned her head and glanced at Wei Ling'er. Seeing the latter showing a threatening look on his face, Mu Kejunya also smiled. "I accept your apology, but of course, I will still not give up my principles. Anyone who dares to provoke me will definitely die without a burial place." After saying the last sentence, Mu Qiu still had a spring breeze-like smile on her face, as if what she said was just a trivial matter. Humph, what a loud tone. Song Tsonghua walked over from the side, looked at Mu Qiu with a somewhat unkind expression, and said in a cold tone, "I hope some people won't be so frightened that they can't walk when they see those zombie heretics in the ruins of the city." Mu Qiu was not angry about this, but just smiled. "Then let's wait and see. Would you feel angry if there were ants crawling under your feet? If you don't like it, just find an opportunity to step on it." Mu Qiu's dull reaction actually made Song Tsonghua feel as if his fist had hit cotton. Mu Qiu's calm smile looked more like a mocking sneer in Song Tsonghua's eyes. He ground his teeth in anger, snorted and walked aside. However, Mu Qiu felt keenly that Song Tsonghua's supernatural power had reached the peak of B level, and the intensity of the supernatural energy was also the highest in the entire team. This kind of strength is among the best in the search team, no wonder he has such an arrogant attitude. Okay, today is the first time we meet. If we don't have to perform a mission, we must go out for a drink. Fat man Zhu Feng saw this and quickly came out to smooth things over, put his arms around Mu Qiu's neck, and said with a natural smile, "Welcome brother Mu to join our Demon Glantian team." Mu Qiu. Butterfly dream fading. Mu Chiu turned her head stiffly and looked at Wei Linger with an unnatural expression on her face. The corner of her mouth twitched and said, "This name couldn't have been given by you, right?" "Uh-huh." Wei Linger snorted softly and raised her neck like a proud swan. "How is it?" "My name is quite nice, isn't it?" Mu Chiu twitched the corner of her mouth again, dumbfounded. "Yes, quite individual." "Boss, I said at the beginning that it would be great to call the team the Avengers. We are domineering but also a little tender. At first glance, we are a team with substance." Fatty seemed to have some objections to the name of the team. I think the God of War team is pretty good too. This is the aesthetics of the middle-aged Uncle Chen Weigua. Do you have any objections to my name?" Wei Linger waved her pink fist and showed her fangs, looking like she was going to explode. Don't dare, don't dare." Mu Chiu took a sip of coffee silently. The smell is too strong. He is really not suitable for drinking such high-end products." The group of people didn't chat for too long before packing up their equipment and getting ready to set off. Mu Chiu noticed that except for Lao Chen, who carried a standard rifle on his shoulder, and Song Tsonghua, who had a pistol on his waist, the others did not bring any obvious equipment. Only Lu Qingfei carried a small medical kit. Mu Chiu followed everyone to the back door of the cafe. I saw two domineering-looking Jeep off-road vehicles parked one behind the other at the entrance of the alley behind the coffee shop. The off-road vehicle obviously showed signs of being modified. The tires were wide and thick, and the front and rear bumpers of the vehicle were welded with strong steel bars. They were as ferocious as the fangs of a beast. From a distance, it looked like two steel beasts crawling on the ground. Seeing that there were only two cars around, Mu Chiu couldn't help but wonder, are we setting off alone? Song Tsonghua mocked, you are really a newcomer, you don't even know such an important rule. Chen Weigua, the uncle in work clothes, explained, haha, little brother Mu is new here. It's normal not to know the rules of the search team soon after entering the base. Under normal circumstances, each search team has its own independent gathering place, and the outbound missions never start together. Chen Weigua suddenly said solemnly to Mu Chiu. Moreover, even if the search team comes out of the same base, they may not be trustworthy when they arrive in the ruins outside the city. Chen Weigua squinted his eyes and looked at the skyline stretching outside the city, with a slight sense of vicissitudes of life on his face. In the vast ruins of the city, the people there are truly lawless and can do anything. The only thing you can trust is your teammates and your own abilities. We have seen too many examples of interceptions and search teams fighting and killing each other because of a little grudge. It can be said that once the search team goes out, no one can guarantee who will actually come back alive. Speaking of this, Mu Chiu noticed that everyone's face showed a solemn expression. Even the little girl named Su Wen turned pale, as if she thought of something terrible, and her body started to tremble. Okay, old Chen, stop scaring people here. Fatty noticed the tense atmosphere and quickly stood up to refute Chen Weigua. What is the level of our team this time? They are all strong soldiers. The monsters in the yellow zone can't stop us at all. Besides, don't we still have Dr. Lu, a healing awakener, and Mu Chiu, an elemental awakener with amazing destructive power? This lineup can form a group to eliminate even A-level heretics. Isn't it as easy as playing a dungeon? Fat Chu Feng was very open-minded and didn't think there would be any surprises in this mission. In short, we still have to be vigilant. The heretical abilities in the outside world are also all kinds of strange and varied. Maybe we will catch them at some point. Wei Linger gave a pertinent evaluation at this time. Mu Chiu nodded. It could be seen that this team had some experience in performing missions. The team was divided into two groups. Mu Chiu, Fatty, Wei Linger and little Lolita Su Wen sat in the front car, with Fatty acting as the driver. The other car was occupied by the remaining Lu Qingfei, the short-haired man Song Tsonghua and the middle-aged uncle Chen Weigua. In the car, Mu Chiu noticed that the large trunk was full of food and water, and the remaining space was filled with weapons and equipment and a small number of tools. The two steel beasts started with the roar of exhaust gas. Mu Chiu was sitting in the passenger seat, with Wei Linger and Su Wen sitting behind her. The little girl seemed to feel a little tired. Not long after the car started, she tilted her head and fell asleep. The squirrel in her arms was not afraid of danger, and started to chew a nut. Mu Chiu turned her head to look at Wei Linger, and asked with an interested smile. "I have never heard that concubine Lu Qing will accompany us on missions." Wei Linger blinked her eyes and looked out the window pretending to be reserved. "Is there any?" Maybe I forgot to mention it." Mu Chiu is still smiling and staring. Wei Linger was stared at for a while and felt uncomfortable. She shook her head and said, Okay, you win. I did know that Sister Qingfei would act with us." "Why is she with us?" Mu Chiu asked. Wei Linger explained. Sister Qingfei handed over her fiancé's mobile phone to the people in the technical department, and from it they were able to decipher the location where her husband last appeared. That's why Sister Qingfei applied to her superiors to find her fiancé through the search team, but she was worried and insisted on coming, so I suggested that she join our team. In addition to searching for resources, our mission this time is also to help Sister Qingfei find her fiancé. Oh. Mu Chiu didn't think it was that surprising. He had long known that the Virgin was a character who valued love and justice. Now that there was news about her husband, Mu Chiu would feel abnormal if he just sat there and waited for death. Then where was the last place her husband disappeared? Wei Linger shrugged and said helplessly, "That place seems to be called Tiandi Entertainment Club, and it is located right at the border of the yellow zone and the red zone. That is to say, our mission may have to run through the entire yellow zone this time. Even for those of us, it is a bit dangerous to carry out such a mission." Daishiandi Entertainment Club? Mu Chiu's eyes widened instantly, and her expression was no longer as calm as before. He has never forgotten that the next check-in location given by the system is the Daishiandi Entertainment Club. At first, he searched for nearby maps but could not find this place. Unexpectedly, he could find it now without any effort. When Wei Linger saw Mu Chiu's appearance, she seemed to think of something and suddenly said, "I remember, you asked me about this place before. How come you know this place?" Only then did Wei Linger remember that she had heard this Daishiandi Entertainment Club mentioned somewhere in Lu Qingfei's mouth, but she couldn't remember it after thinking about it for a long time. But Mu Chiu's behavior reminded her that the first time she heard about this place was from Mu Chiu's mouth. Wei Linger looked at Mu Chiu with suspicious eyes. This time, it was Mu Chiu's turn to feel guilty and she hurriedly explained. "I have a relative who happens to work there, and I want to see if he is still alive." Wei Linger frowned and said, "That entertainment club is located in Lannan City, next to Yuhai City. Do you have relatives working there?" Wei Linger was such a smart girl, and obviously didn't completely believe Mu Chiu's words, but she could also see that Mu Chiu didn't want to say anything more, so she didn't say anything more. But the fat man driving the car interrupted at this moment. "What kind of relative?" "If you ask me, it must be Mu Chiu, your goddess before the end of the world, right? You were worried about the safety of the goddess, so the first thing you thought about after being rescued to the safe area was to save the goddess from fire and water." The fat man's brain circuit is very strange, and at this time, he has already imagined a drama about a loser obsessed with a goddess. Wei Linger, who was sitting in the back row, gave the fat man a slap in the face, then apologized to Mu Chiu. "You won't blame me for Sister Qingfei's matter, right?" Mu Chiu shook her head and said with a smile, "So when you came to my place yesterday to call for punishment, you actually wanted to get a vaccination today?" Mu Chiu did not forget that Wei Linger warned her yesterday to have a better attitude after seeing concubine Lu Qing. Obviously she had expected this situation. Wei Linger stuck out her tongue. "Aren't I worried that you will be embarrassed when we meet?" Mu Chiu explained that she didn't care, but looked out the car window with a smile on her lips. Of course not. Besides, I think that with the Holy Mother Lu Qingfei here, this journey will not be too boring. The corners of Mu Qiu's mouth rose, as if she had seen something interesting. Although it didn't matter what she said that day, it didn't mean that Mu Qiu could agree with Lu Qingfei's ideas. During this trip, he was looking forward to the performance of the Holy Mother. Yes, this desperate mission that seemed to be full of dangers among the team members was just a leisurely trip back home in Mu Qiu's eyes. Who would feel scared after returning to their hometown? Two steel-clad and tenacious steel beasts were rampaging on the deserted quiet streets, and the surrounding stores echoed with the huge roar of engines. Soon, two modified jeeps drove a group of 7 people off-road to a row of walls made of solid rocks, like steel. Mu Qiu was finally able to observe the tall wall that protected tens of thousands of survivors up close this time. The appearance and function of this wall looked like the kind of wall in a certain giant. They are all designed to protect the safety of survivors in the city. However, it is obvious that the workmanship of this wall is much better than that in Giant. It is several feet tall and long. The wall's surface is smooth, hard and thick, and the wall has a green iron color. Mu Qiu speculated that the awakened people should have dug up the underground bedrock with strange strength and moved it here. Then the awakened people who had assimilated the rock carefully polished the bedrock and poured it into this steel wall. Not surprisingly, there are also special law enforcement guards patrolling the walls. After some review, the 2 off-road vehicles passed through the iron gate of the wall and drove out of one of the few pure lands of mankind in this apocalyptic world. Even after driving out of the fence, there is an empty highway in front, and it is still silent. Not to mention the zombies, even the bird feathers are nowhere to be seen. On the other hand, on the asphalt road that was cracked by the scorching sun, one could see large areas of dried blood. Mu Qiu speculated that the surrounding area had already been cleared by the awakened ones in the base. The glaring sunlight shines in through the car window, making it hard to open your eyes, and the summer breeze brings a little coolness to your face. If it weren't for the scarlet blood stains on the ground, just looking at this scene, I would have thought it was an ordinary group outing before the end of the world. The 2 jeeps, which looked like ferocious steel beasts, were racing wildly on the empty asphalt road. Occasionally I encountered a few abandoned vehicles that were weathered by the weather on the road, and I would just run them over. The 2 off-road vehicles were speeding along the road, and in a short time they were dozens of kilometers away from Yuhai. Wild music was playing in the car, and the accelerator under the fat man's feet also accelerated crazily to the rhythm of the music. A ferocious zombie in ragged clothes and covered in blood was walking on the road nearby. Hearing the sound of the accelerator, he rushed towards Mu Qiu's off-road vehicle like a lion fighting a rabbit. The fat man was unafraid. He swayed to the music, stepped on the accelerator, and hit the zombie directly. In an instant, blood spattered on the front bumper of the off-road vehicle, and the glass was already covered in flesh and blood. Not surprised, the fat man turned on the wipers to clean the windshield, while Wei Linger in the back seat let out a bored sigh, as if she had long been used to it. He is indeed a member of the search team who has experienced hundreds of battles. Mu Qiu held her chin and nodded in appreciation. Mu Qiu, you have a very strong psychological quality. The things you will see in the future are much more terrifying than these. Fatty saw Mu Qiu looking at the blur of flesh and blood outside the window and was in a daze. He thought Mu Qiu was frightened by the violent scene and warned him. Mu Qiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and said, "Then we will have to help you, fat man, to protect us." The fat man patted his chest, gave a thumbs up confidently, and said, "Don't worry, I, Zhu Feng, will be here, there will be no surprises." Unlike the Yuhai safe zone, which was quickly recaptured, Lannan City quickly faced collapse shortly after the outbreak of the apocalyptic virus. In less than a month, Lannan City was captured by countless zombie heretics and completely turned into a survival paradise for these irrational monsters. Here many zombie heretics eat each other and evolve, breeding many heretical monsters with terrifying strength. In a neighborhood in Lannan City, hundreds of kilometers away from Yuhai City, thousands of hungry zombies with haggard bodies, staring with empty eyes, waving their deformed sharp claws, and constantly making gurgle sounds from their throats. The air exuded a strong smell of putrefaction and blood, as if forming a smelly blood mist, which was nauseating. Because they cannot be replenished with fresh flesh and blood for a long time, these zombies can only rely on the small amount of supernatural energy in their bodies to barely maintain their lives. When the supernatural energy in their bodies is not enough to support action, they will kill the same kind crazily, fight and devour each other, and rob each other's supernatural energy to survive. It has nothing to do with rational wisdom, it is just a survival instinct of a living thing. A zombie seemed to have discovered something. It suddenly opened its mouth, stretched out its sharp claws, and rushed towards an iron fence in the distance with a ferocious face. At this moment, the violent roar of the car sounded. A jeep with a ferocious appearance and armored body armor sprinted like a steel beast, slamming into an iron fence next to the block. All the zombies behind the iron net were crushed and destroyed by this steel behemoth. For a moment, blood mist filled the sky, and blurred limbs and broken arms were splashed everywhere, directly dyeing the off-road vehicle body in blood red. Woohoo! The fat man got out of the car first. He was wearing a pair of square sunglasses and looking at his masterpiece with a proud look. Full of darkness and horror, the aesthetics of violence are simply a classic work of art. The fat man's face showed a look of intoxication, as if he was sighing for his masterpiece. Stop playing tricks, don't forget that we are here to do business. Wei Linger and little Lolita Su Wen walked out of the car. Seeing this bloody scene, they both frowned with disgust on their faces. Mu Qiu also got out of the passenger seat, still wearing a black windbreaker and waist-high trousers, looking casual. Feeling the strong smell of blood in the air, as if the real blood was about to invade the skin, arousing the hidden inner demons. Mu Qiu breathed a sigh of relief. The violent emotions belonging to the fire demon lord in his body also rarely conveyed a relaxed emotion. Feeling like going home. At the same time, the same violent engine roar came from behind, and another armed off-road vehicle sped from behind. Holy Mother Lu Qingfei, middle-aged Uncle Chen Weigua and licking dog Song Tsonghua got out of the car. 7 people gathered together. Wei Linger was the first to say, there are many high-level heretics in the city. Driving in and making too much noise can easily cause zombie riots. Then we have to explore on foot. With that said, Wei Linger took out a tablet with an electronic map carved on it. It marks the location of a large number of resources hidden in the city. Our task is to determine the detailed location of these resources and clean up the powerful heretics around them. If survivors are found in the ruins of this city, we must protect their safety as much as possible and report to the base for rescue. Wei Linger briefly introduced the general task process, then pointed to a certain location on the map and looked at Su Wen, the Lolita in the floral skirt beside her. Su Wen nodded knowingly, put her finger to her mouth and whistled softly. Mu Qiu seemed to feel something. She looked up and saw a sparrow the size of a hand swoop down upon hearing the sound and landed in Su Wen's delicate palm. Several obscure sounds suddenly came out of Su Wen's mouth. The sparrow seemed to understand something. After chirping twice, it spread its wings and flew into the distance. Mu Qiu looked on in amazement. Chen Weigua couldn't help but exclaimed, no matter how many times I see Xiaowen's abilities, I am still amazed. After a while, the sparrow flew back, Su Wen fed a nut to it, and the little sparrow immediately rubbed Su Wen's cheek affectionately. Sister Linger, Mao Mao said that if you go to the southeast, there will be a dark mass of zombies, and there is also a monster inside that makes Mao Mao tremble. Mu Qiu examined the sparrow named Mao Mao and found that the latter was not as simple as it seemed. Although the supernatural energy in its body was not high, it still reached D level. Judging from the way it moves like the wind, this little sparrow probably has speed powers, so it would be perfect for it to explore the way. When Wei Linger learned the news, she looked at several locations marked on the map, thought for a while and then said, "In that case, let's take a detour and go to the Third People's Hospital of Lannan City to search for medical resources first. Wen, please tell Mao Mao to check the situation from a distance and report it immediately if anything happens." Others obviously had no objections, so the group of 7 people set out on their journey towards the east direction of the city. The fat man hit Mu Qiu with his elbow and said with a smile, "How about it? Wenwen's power is very convenient, right? Thanks to these little guys, we have avoided a lot of casualties." Chen Weiguo also said with a simple smile. Su Wen blushed again when she heard everyone's praise. "No. Thanks to everyone for protecting me." While everyone was talking and laughing, suddenly a dozen zombies emerged from the darkness at the entrance of the street and attacked everyone with their bloody mouths open. Mu Qiu had expected it, but made no move. Among the others, Lao Chen was the first to react. He folded his arms, and when the supernatural energy surged, a wide barrier several feet long appeared in front of everyone. Song Tsunghua's eyes flashed with murderous intent, and he roared. His body changed, and a layer of dark blue mane began to appear on his body, extending to his face. The muscles in his arms could be clearly seen bulging, and even his chest also followed. The bulge swelled, and the veins on the back of the hand popped out, and 2 sharp thorns several feet long protruded. This Song Tsonghua is clearly a wolf-shaped mutant awakener. Song Tsonghua's hamstring burst out, and immediately his feet trembled, and he rushed over like an arrow, punching a zombie hard, and the protruding spikes on the back of his fist directly stabbed the zombie's head. Pierce. Then he pulled the zombie next to him, hit the zombie's chest with both fists like a giant hammer, and immediately pulled it out with force, and the zombie was torn into 2 halves. Song Tsonghua's eyes were full of murderous intent, and his fighting spirit was also rising. He rushed into the zombie group alone and fought with dozens of zombies who came after hearing the sound. I saw that Song Tsonghua was like a jungle beast that drank blood. He rushed into the zombies like a tiger into a pack of wolves. His arms were instantly soaked with blood, and the zombies around him were even more tragic. They all fell to the ground and were disemboweled. The belly is dripping with blood, and the bloody and violent scene is unbearable to watch. The team members behind him all watched Song Tsonghua fighting alone, but had no intention of stepping forward to help. Roar! Suddenly, there was a loud roar in the distance. Everyone looked up and saw 2 ferocious wild dogs roaring crazily and rushing towards the barrier set up by Chen Weiguo with their mouths wide open. It was said to be a wild dog, but its size was comparable to that of an average adult tiger. It was huge, its hair was a strange gray-white color, and its ferocious protruding fangs were stained with blood. Just like that, the huge body of the giant dog that looked like a ferocious beast slammed into Chen Weiguo's barrier, but the barrier only shook, and instead the 2 ferocious beasts were bounced away. The powerful momentum forced the giant dog to roll several times on the ground, shook its head and licked its fur, then roared loudly and showed murderous intent towards Mu Qiu and the others. "Hey, a B-level mutant dog. Just let me practice my skills." The fat man was experienced and could see the level of these 2 mutated dogs at a glance. He grinned and took out 2 steel finger tigers from his waist, and rushed forward in a flash. Mu Qiu nodded. These 2 mutant dogs only had the strength of the early B-level, and the supernatural energy in their bodies was not stable. Fatty's superfast movement was also the most suitable for targeting such difficult mutant monsters. Sure enough, the fat man was as tall as the wind, and his speed was so fast that it was almost impossible to detect it with the naked eye. He jumped dozens of meters in the blink of an eye. Before even the 2 giant dogs could react, Fatty's agile figure had already dodged in front of a vicious dog. The fat man smiled. At the corner of his mouth, waved the finger tiger on his fist and waved at his head. The mutated giant dog howled and was instantly knocked away several meters. Another mutated giant dog also reacted, opened its big mouth and bit the fat man. The fat man was not afraid in the face of danger, beating the giant dog back with his fists like punching sacks. This fat man has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. Mu Chiu saw that Fatty didn't just hit him casually. Fatty's attacks were ruthless and decisive, and he specialized in hitting the vital points of life points. He was quite an expert. Wei Linger explained, "Don't look at how cheap Fatty is usually, but he was a professional fitness coach before the end of the world. Other people will become hungry and thinner in the end of the world, but this fat man is lucky that his muscles have gained weight and turned into fat." Mu Chiu couldn't laugh or cry. Other people are getting thinner and thinner, how come fat people are still growing in reverse? Just for fun. Wei Linger rolled her eyes and complained, "Every time he comes back from a mission, this fat man eats and drinks a lot. After the meal, he goes to find women. He eats and drinks excessively and is extravagant. If he is not fat, who is fat?" As she said that, Wei Linger once again thought of the entertainment club that Mu Chiu had asked about, and looked at Mu Chiu with suspicious eyes. "You won't be as dirty as him, right?" Mu Chiu hurriedly waved her hand. "How is that possible? Is he still a baby now? How could a gentleman like him, a peerless good man, do such a thing?" Looking at the battle in the distance, Song Tsonghua was already covered in blood, and he was even more of a zombie than a zombie. The surrounding zombies fell into pieces, and their limbs were torn to pieces everywhere. Only a few scattered zombies were still launching fierce attacks on them. On Fatty's side, a zombie dog had been beaten to the point where it lay on the ground with its head on its back, not knowing whether it was alive or dead. The other one was blinded in one eye, but it was also covered in scars and dripping with blood. It was obvious that it could not last much longer. The battle has come to an end, and everyone's vigilance can't help but be greatly reduced. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. A short yellow figure rushed out from the grass on the side of the road, and like an arrow from a string, it pounced on concubine Lu Qing, who was standing aside before anyone could react. When everyone reacted, the short figure shining with cold light was no more than an inch away from Lu Qingfei's delicate and fair cheeks. Click! A ray of ice blocked the attack of the short figure. A slightly cold touch passed across Lu Qingfei's face, and then shot straight towards the attacking short yellow figure. The light blue ice pick hit the short yellow figure's calf like a thunderbolt. Immediately, the frost hit like a wave, freezing the figure into ice in an instant. This icy blue ice cone is very familiar to Lu Qingfei. She suddenly turned her head and looked behind her, only to see Mu Chiu standing there quietly, with an outstretched arm still wrapped with strands of ice-blue cold air. Mu Chiu's eyes narrowed into crescent moons, and she smiled at concubine Lu Qing and said, "If you don't stay vigilant at all times, there will be danger, my holy lady." Seeing that the danger was over, Lu Qingfei's tensed nerves slowly relaxed. But upon hearing Mu Chiu's slightly teasing words, concubine Lu Qing frowned slightly again. She didn't like Mu Chiu's sarcastic tone. But he still said to Mu Chiu, "Thank you, I will be careful." After saying that, concubine Lu Qing turned her head to look at the short yellow figure wrapped in ice on the ground. It turns out that this is a dark yellow kitten with the head length of an ordinary person. It's just that this kitten has obviously been highly mutated. Half of its face is so rotten that you can clearly see the squirming maggots inside. It has a ferocious face, 2 baby teeth are protruding and curved, and a pair of sharp claws on its front feet are shining with a strange cold light. Okay, Mu Chiu, your reaction speed is second to none. Fatty had just finished dealing with the 2 mutated giant dogs. He happened to see Mu Chiu condensing ice picks to deal with the mutated cats, and stepped forward to praise them. Little brother Mu is worthy of being the awakener of the elemental system. He will put us to shame as soon as he uses this method. Chen Weigua said with a smile. Mu Chiu, I saved Sister Qingfei, I'll give you a head start. Wei Ling'er patted her petite chest, feeling a little scared. Lu Qingfei is a rare member of the medical team. If something goes wrong, they will not be able to escape the blame. Besides, Wei Ling'er was also very happy to see the relationship between Mu Qiu and Lu Qingfei easing. Song Songhua came forward covered in blood and asked with concern, "Concubine Qing, are you okay?" Concubine Lu Qing shook her head and said nothing. Then Song Songhua looked at the mutated kitten frozen in the ice, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Although this mutated cat was not very strong and only looked like a sea-level cat, it was surprisingly fast. At first, no one except Mu Qiu could react. But Mu Qiu not only reacted in time, but also killed it with one blow. Even he, a peak B-level awakener, couldn't do this. TCH, Elemental Awakener. This guy is so lucky. Sensing something strange about concubine Lu Qing, Song Songhua looked at Mu Qiu with a hint of jealousy in his eyes.